Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Nolan Dick, the chair of the committee. I look forward to chairing this committee here today. I would like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone here for this fantastic resource stewardship committee. Today, we have under consideration the estimates from the Ministry of Treasury, Board and Finance for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2027. I would like to go around the table and do introductions and have members introduce themselves. Minister, when it comes to you, please introduce yourself as well as your team sitting at the table. My name is Nolan Dick, and I am the MLA for Grand Prairie, as well as the chair of this committee. To my right.
Scott Sear, MLA, Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul.
Tanny Howe, Fort McMurray, Wood Buffalo.
Chelsea Petrovic, Livingston McLeod.
Garth Roosevelt, Vermilion, Lloydminster, Wainwright.
Good morning, everyone. Jackie Armstrong, Hominick, Fort Saskatchewan, Vickerville.
Good morning, Nate Horner, MLA for Drumheller, Stettler, Minister of Finance, President of Treasury Board. Joined at the table today, starting at my far left, Joffrey Hotz, Assistant Deputy Minister and Senior Financial Officer for Treasury Board and Finance. Darren Headley, to my immediate left, the Deputy Minister of Treasury Board and Finance. To my right, Dana Hogeman, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Treasury Board Secretariat. And to my far right, Lyndon Epp, Acting Assistant Deputy Minister of Economics and Fiscal Policy.
Good morning, Heather Sweet, MLA for Edmonton Manning.
Morning, Cord Ellingson, MLA for Calgary Foothills and Shadow Minister for Finance.
Good morning, Rhiannon Hoyle and MLA for Edmonton South.
Good morning, Gurtesh Singh Brar, MLA for Edmonton Ellerslie.
Excellent, thanks very much. We have no one joining us online. If somebody does, we will have them introduce themselves when the time comes. A few housekeeping items here for today. Microphones are operated by Hansert, so you don't have to run themselves. Committee proceedings are live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of meetings can be accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. We have, as I said, we'll deal with the remote participation at the time. Please set your cell phones and other devices to silent for the duration of the meeting. Any cell phones going off, I will be instructing a big fine. Don't know what that is. Depends on how loud it is. So we'll do that. But we've only had one incident and no fines yet. So we'll deal with that if it comes. So thank you for putting your cell phones on silent. The main estimates for the Ministry of Treasury, Board and Finance shall be considered for 6 hours. Therefore, it is the first of 2 3-hour meetings. Standing Order 5901 sets out the process for consideration of the main estimates in legislative policy committees. Suborder 59016 sets out the speaking rotation for this meeting. This is available through Warren if you want to see a hard copy, or available on the website, the internal website. When the time comes, both members have to agree either to back and forth, or the minister can choose block time too as well, or both can choose block time if they choose. We'll deal with that per individual who is speaking and asking questions. Now, saying this all the time, please reference your questions to the chair. I'm the chair. Just reference that. That sounds great. Now, halfway through each 3-hour block, I would like to take a 5-minute break near the midpoint of the meeting. However, the meeting clock will continue to run. I do need unanimous consent for this, so if anybody says anything, we can't have one. Does anybody oppose having a break? Perfect, 5-minute break. We will take that about halfway through. Ministry officials, those at the both at the table and the back, at the direction of the minister, may address the committee. Ministry officials sitting in the gallery, please, if the minister asks, please come on up to the podium, say your name, and then speak about what the topic is. Nobody may approach the table. We have some excellent pages around, sitting over here and over here. If you would like to need any information passed between the minister or anybody at the table and the gallery, please use the pages. They do a great job. Points of order will be dealt with as they arise, and then any written material provided will, in response to questions arisen during the main estimates, shall be tabled by the minister in the assembly for the benefit of all members. Now, I would like to give the minister an opportunity to open us up. 10 minutes, Minister, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Sure, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Nate Horner, President of Treasury Board, Minister of Finance. Just one more time, I did introduce these folks, but I'm going to do it one more time. Joined here today by Darren Headley, the Deputy Minister of Treasury Board and Finance, Dana Hogeman, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Treasury Board Secretariat, Lyndon Epp, Acting Assistant Deputy Minister of Economics and Fiscal Policy, and Joffrey Hotz, Assistant Deputy Minister and Senior Financial Officer for Treasury Board and Finance. I would also like to acknowledge that there are several other representatives of the ministry, government, and related entities who are in the gallery here today, and who will be ready to answer any questions. Today, I'll outline the 2026 through 2029 business plan and estimates for the Ministry of Treasury Board and Finance, which includes the Treasury Board and Finance Department, the Public Service Commission, the agencies, boards, and commissions that report to me as minister. On February 26, I tabled a budget that focused on what matters. We're committed to making responsible choices that benefit all Albertans by controlling costs and setting clear priorities to ensure taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. Like many jurisdictions, Alberta is facing uncertainty in the global economy, and as a result, our economy is forecast to grow at a slower pace in 2026. This is due to ongoing trade uncertainty following broad tariffs introduced by the United States last year, while slower population growth weighs on economic activity. Despite the slowdown, Alberta is still expected to outperform the rest of the country this year. Most importantly, we will continue to deliver the services Albertans rely on. We continue to invest in healthcare capacity, including hospital beds, healthcare professionals, and critical services. We are strengthening education by increasing funding to reduce class size and complexity and supporting educators as they provide students with quality learning. We're also bolstering the economy by investing in industries, infrastructure, and a skilled workforce. I'd like to take a few minutes to provide details on each of these priorities. It's no secret that Alberta remains the best place in Canada to live, work, and raise a family. While we have a track record of welcoming newcomers, the elevated population growth in recent years has created pressures on our programs and services, including healthcare. That's why our budget decisions prioritize patients and are geared toward improving capacity with an investment of $34.4 billion in the healthcare system. This funding will go towards hospital beds, healthcare professionals, and the services patients rely on when they need it most. That's a $1.9 billion increase to ensure Albertans receive the care they need when and where they need it. This includes an additional $525 million in funding to deliver 50,000 more surgical procedures over the next 3 years by leveraging chartered surgical facilities to expand operating room capacity and reduce wait times. And $1.7 million provided to civil societies will support Albertans in crisis, including those experiencing overdose or substance use disorder, helping them receive timely support and relieve emergency department congestion. There is $152 million for continuing care initiatives and $146 million for continuing care capacity and alternate level of care initiatives. This will help patients transition from hospital to appropriate continuing care settings, helping reduce capacity pressures in hospitals. Turning to another top priority of our government and Albertans, we know that our education system needs more support to address the enrollment pressures caused by significant population growth. To meet the needs of the province's growing communities, Budget 2026 provides $10.8 billion in operating expenses for education, an increase of $722 million from the 2025-2026 forecast. This includes $1.8 billion to support students with specialized learning needs, which is an increase of $86.5 million from 2025-2026. And there's also funding of $355 million in 26-27 and $1.4 billion over 3 years to hire 3,000 more teachers and 1,500 more education assistants to help address class size and complexity. Budget 2026's capital plan also invests $3.3 billion over 3 years to support new and ongoing school projects, which is $712 million higher than Budget 2025. This infrastructure funding will build and renovate more schools to meet the needs of growing rural and smaller communities. Alberta is growing, and our ability to provide exceptional learning spaces throughout the province must grow with it. Alberta's government is also committed to strengthening the economy by investing in the industries, infrastructure, and skilled workforce that drive jobs and opportunity. $115 million is going toward workforce strategies, and $16 million will go to economic immigration programs and services. A further $81 million is being allocated for labor relations, occupational health and safety, and employment standards. And in 26-27, there's $4 million to support training opportunities for Indigenous people in Alberta through the Employment Partnership Program. Alberta's economy needs skilled people in a variety of positions so it can continue to thrive. To help students pursue their passions, $1.3 billion is going towards Alberta student loans, scholarships, and grants to help reduce financial barriers to post-secondary education. The apprenticeship learning grant of $96 million will expand classroom instruction seats across the province and respond to demand for apprenticeship training. And targeted enrollment expansion initiatives will benefit from $148 million over 3 years to increase the number of seats in high-demand post-secondary programs such as healthcare, education, and engineering. Alberta's greatest resource is its people. It's the people of this province who have made it rich with talent and strong communities. We're funding a number of projects that will ensure we continue to build these strong communities. For example, $169 million is being allocated to support effective wildfire mitigation and $80 million in capital funding over 3 years to expand irrigation capacity and modernize water supply needs. And more than $179 million in grant funding in 26-27 will be allocated from the First Nations Development Fund to help support First Nations economic, social, and community priorities. And over 3 years, $2.4 billion in provincial funding, including $1.1 billion in federal support, will go toward LRT projects to enhance connectivity for the growing populations in the 2 largest metropolitan areas. We continue efforts to establish Alberta as a destination of choice for companies to innovate and scale in high-impact sectors through the Alberta Technology and Innovation Strategy. We're also positioning the province as a prime destination for international and local data centers through the implementation of the Alberta Artificial Intelligence Data Center Strategy. Growing businesses and industry is paramount to the province's ongoing success. Budget 2026 invests $155 million for the Orphan Wells Society. Agriculture support and insurance programs delivered by the Agriculture Financial Services Corporation, or AFSC, are receiving $605 million. And in 26-27, investments of $28 million will go towards the Investment and Growth Fund and $15 million for the Invest Alberta Corporation. Budget 2026 increases access to affordable, high-quality, and inclusive licensed childcare and commits $2.1 billion for this program in Budget 2026. And $405 million will go to the Alberta Child and Family Benefit Program in 26-27 to support lower and middle-income families with children under 18. As well, there's $156 million in 26-27 to deliver prevention, intervention, and mental health and addiction services for children and youth in schools and in community. And $22 million in 26-27 to build, and $53 million to operate recovery community facilities across the province. The Affordable Housing Partnership Program will receive $768 million over 3 years to support the goal of creating 13,000 affordable housing units. More than $217 million in 26-27 will support homeless shelters, navigation and support centers, and housing support programs, and $64 million will go to seniors' lodges through the Lodge Assistance Program. The 2026 capital plan focuses on building communities and maintaining important public infrastructure that supports families and businesses. A total of $28.3 billion is being allocated over the next 3 years, which is $2.2 billion more than Budget 2025. Funding is being invested into many areas to expand capacity in the education and healthcare systems, support skills development and training, build roads and bridges to support economic activity, and spur private investment and growth. The funding also supports investments in Alberta's growth, enabling opportunities for private sector participation and supporting more than 31,000 direct jobs and 14,500 indirect jobs annually through 28-29. Now I'll speak briefly about the 3 outcomes of Treasury Board and Finance's 26 through 29 business plan. Treasury Board and Finance is committed to a strong and resilient financial foundation that maintains fiscal discipline and supports sustainable government services. We will undertake a review of our fiscal framework to assess what measures are appropriate to support sustainable fiscal planning for Alberta. Outcome 2, the business plan also ensures policy and regulatory oversight of the financial, securities, insurance, and pension sectors is effective, fair, and in the interests of Albertans.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Minister, for your comments. I really appreciate that. It was a great way to kick off the meeting. We now begin the question and answer portion of our period. This is a 60-minute block with the, so this is a caucus block, so you can cede time in the future. In the 10-minute blocks, that is a member-only time, so you can cede time. Minister, would you like to go back and forth over this time, or would you like block time?
Happy to go back and forth if that.
Perfect,
Good with
perfect, excellent. Member, you have, oh, and just for the record, nobody can speak more than 10 minutes at a time before pushing it back to the other member. So, excellent. Remember, it looks like it's in your court here. Go ahead.
I've never heard that joke before. Thank you, Chair. And happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. Banach dina fela paragagat. May the blessings of Patrick be upon you. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are today on Treaty 6 territory, and that Alberta also is in Treaty 7, Treaty 8, Treaty 4, and Treaty 10 territory, as well as the Métis Nation of Alberta. I think it's important in all of our work that we consider truth and reconciliation, and that all of our actions are considering truth and reconciliation, as is the very budget itself. Through the chair, I want to thank the minister and all of those in Treasury Board and Finance for the work done in preparing this budget and for the support and participation in today's discussion. Preparing this budget is a monumental undertaking. I think most Albertans really don't appreciate how much work goes into the operations of the government of a province. It's far larger and far more complex than any company I'm sure that they have ever touched or had exposure to. This is important work, and it's equally important that we take the time to have these discussions and consider some of the decisions that have been made. The budget affects the lives of all Albertans, and we should be considering the lives of the most vulnerable, and always keep in mind that we are all treaty people, as I said, and strive to address the recommendations made in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Last year, we had a respectful and meaningful discussion, and it is my intent that we have a similar cordial conversation this year. I also remember that last year, Minister, you were disappointed that we didn't ask more questions about the deficit, so I thought maybe that would be a good start for this year, since the deficit is slightly larger. Page 7 of the fiscal plan reminds us the fiscal framework and the allowable deficit for the year, just so that we have all the references in one place. The Sustainable Fiscal Planning and Reporting Act, updated in 2024, outlines the rules for projected deficits in section 11.2. And there are two scenarios that allow for a deficit, one where the expected revenue is $1 billion less than the Q3 forecast revenue, and the second where the projected revenue is less than the Q3 forecast expense. This budget meets the second criteria, so we can proceed. Given that, there are also rules set out that limit the size of the deficit, that being the greater one of the difference between the budgeted revenue and the Q3 forecast revenue, and also the difference between the budgeted revenue and the Q3 forecast expense. I believe on page 7 of the fiscal plan, the Q3 revenue forecast for 25-26 is $75.3 billion. The estimated revenue for 26-27 is $74.6 billion. The Q3 forecast expenses are on page 70 at $79.4 billion. The first rule would allow for approximately a $750 million deficit, while the second allows for a $4.9 billion deficit. So it's the greater of the two is the $4.9 billion. First, through the chair to the minister, is my interpretation correct? Have I read the numbers correctly? And if we can just say, is the government breaking the rules of their fiscal framework in the budgeting deficit for 26-27?
Yeah, I would say I didn't hear anything in your summation that was incorrect. I'm looking at Darren. 4.9 billion would have been the limit for the size of the deficit. So we're 4.5 billion outside of that. That is the specific rule that we are breaking right now. I've tried to explain that publicly to everyone. I think that when you're looking at, the creators that built the fiscal rules, many of which that are sitting at this table, no doubt, I think it's important to understand that you're always looking backwards to see what Alberta's been through in the past. The different impacts of revenue increases and decreases, what the economy's doing alongside of that. So what we're noticing now that is a challenge is that you're seeing a decline in revenue at a time when the government can't cut expenses to that rate because of the population growth that we've seen. I've told you these statistics before, Mr. Ellingston. We travel in some of the same circles. You've heard me say this. Historically, there was always an economic cause for the population wave that Alberta saw. If you look back into the early 2000s, from 2004 to 2008, I'm going to highlight that time because that was definitely a population surge. We saw the population increase in the province by roughly 11.5%. Alongside it, we saw economic growth of about 24%. What we've seen this time is about a 13.5% population growth from, say, 21 to 25, with an 8% economic growth. So that's what makes this time a little different. You know, a lot of people came here for a lot of reasons, but we were creating more jobs than anywhere in the country. There was more opportunity, but it was mostly an affordability
I
story.
appreciate that. I actually have more questions. We're gonna get more into population growth.
Sure.
And we're actually gonna get more into also kind of like when you look back, what has Alberta been through in the past? So we're gonna talk about that a little bit also.
The size of the deficit is the rule that we're breaking, and that's the one that I've been clear will need to be amended in the fall legislation.
Correct. Thank you for that.
Just as a reminder, member, just make sure it comes through the chair and not just direct to the minister too as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, member.
Chair, and to the Minister, the fiscal framework also requires that once a deficit is recorded, the budget must return to balance in 3 years. Granted, we don't know the final numbers for 25-26, and recent events driving up the price of oil by more than $40 a barrel overnight might yet just save this government from their preceding deficits. However, in the minister's own words, that is unlikely, and the budget table forecasts 3 more years of deficits, leaving us with no path to balance. In a Calgary Herald article dated 27 February 2026, entitled "New Budget is on Course to Collide with the Province's Own Fiscal Guardrails," Trevor Tombe is quoted as saying, "This is the first test of the fiscal framework, and it failed." He further said, "The whole point of a fiscal anchor is to affect fiscal policy to help ensure sustainable public finances." In the same article, the minister is quoted as saying, "The consequences are political. We created these rules and I'm breaking them. It bothers nobody more than it bothers me." Further, we created them to constrain us, to help us make good decisions in tough times, because Alberta's tax structure, royalty revenue, is unique. Our plan is to amend what we must and continue moving forward, end quote. Through the chair to the minister, do you agree with these statements that the government has failed in its first test of the fiscal framework?
Well, I think if you look around the world at jurisdictions that have brought in fiscal rules, there is no example where the fiscal rules need to be as complicated and thoughtful as for Alberta. There's no comparison because of the volatile nature of our resource royalties. So I think that's the first part. The second part is we did bring these in. We created these. I stand by that. You are always reaching for guardrails and anchors to position yourself, because the world is always changing, whether it's population growth or some kind of economic calamity, and in the good times as well. The fiscal rules also limit what we can do with surplus cash. So I would say that when these rules have failed elsewhere, they generally are just repealed. Maybe it's a change in government, change of leadership in the same government that didn't agree that they wanted to be hemmed in the same way. I do want to be hemmed in. And so I do want to amend the rules in a way that works for Alberta, but in a way that Albertans will understand and accept. I don't think there's any, the economists will always say what the economists say, but there's no reasonable landing place for this budget where we would have cut $4.5 billion out and Albertans accepted it. I do believe that. So when I said in the article that, the the implications are political. We set the rules. I'm breaking the rule right now, and I'm being very clear that we're going to amend the rules. But I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I want some rules that will work for the province.
So through the chair to the minister then, you plan on amending the Sustainable Fiscal Planning and Reporting Act rather than repealing it and writing something new? Correct. Through the chair to the minister, will those amendments be service cuts, tax increases, accumulated debt burden for future generations? I'm sure there have already been conversations and discussions happening about what those amendments might look like. What is already being considered?
Well, the rule that we're technically breaking over the size of the deficit, that is the amendment that I'm speaking of, will have to happen in the fall. We are technically outside of that. The 3 consecutive deficit rule, admittedly, I believe we're breaking the spirit of the rule by not showing a path to balance, but we technically have not broken it yet. So I'll commit to you that I would fully expect that the size of the deficit rule will be amended in fall. And that's the considerations that we're having.
So through the chair to the minister, in the spirit of that second rule, the 3-year rule, I guess technically you're not breaking it until you actually incur the deficit in the 3rd year. But you got to think about it long before that. So I guess we'll look forward to seeing just how large you're willing to let the deficit go as we amend those rules. We'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later about how we, if there are any thoughts around like how you would fill that gap. But through the chair, I'll just keep going. Well, it might not be explicitly stated in the budget. There are hidden incremental increases to the personal income tax in the budget. The minister will recall that Bill 32, the Financial Statutes Amendment Act 2024, set the index rate at 2% or inflation, whichever is less. On page 21 of the fiscal plan, the forecast inflation rate is 2.1% for each of 2026, 2027, and 2028. And so the 2% would be less than 2.1%. Through the chair to the minister, this seems like an insignificantly small percentage difference, but in the $15.9 billion budgeted revenue from personal income tax, what would be that number if the brackets had increased with inflation? So if the brackets had moved up 2.1% instead of 2%, what would the difference in revenue from personal income taxes be?
I might ask Lyndon to comment on this specific.
Yes, so to the chair, to the member, the increase in personal income tax revenue will be approximately $10 million.
In each of the 3 years?
Yes, the difference between those two is about $10 million for income tax.
Thank you. And through the chair, I'll continue. The government is making references to these challenging times and the volatility of non-renewable resource revenue and budgeting to cover the investments that we need to drive future growth. I took a moment to look at resource revenues in the past several years to stress test if the government is facing challenges similar to governments in the past. So when we think about what might happen and what those guardrails might be as we move into the future. And so according to the government of Alberta's annual reports, non-renewable resource royalty was $22 billion for the year 2024-25. And I'll use that as a reference as that year produced a sizable budget surplus for the government. This declined to $16.3 billion in 25-26, a decline of 24%. And the budget estimates that those revenues will decline to $13.2 billion, or a total decline of 40% from 24-25 for the budgeted year coming up. So, Chair, with your permission and patience, let's just take a walk back in time to a different government in Alberta. In 2014-15, non-renewable resource revenue was $8.9 billion. The following year, in 2015-2016, that number dropped to $2.8 billion. a decline of 69% in just 1 year. And keep in mind that the starting point was 1/3 of the starting point of this most recent decline. And that revenue earned in that low point was less than 1/4 the forecast revenue of non-renewable resource revenue for 2026. And with further patience from the chair, I'll use one more example. In 1986, according to the Fraser Institute, the government's non-renewable resource revenue declined by 62% from the previous year. This was a result in a collapse of oil from $25 to $12, noticeably lower than it is today, a collapse in magnitude of more than double the current decline in the price of oil. So through the chair to the minister, given these numbers, does the minister agree that we have some history here, that previous governments in Alberta have faced greater fiscal challenges that are being faced today? And maybe there are some lessons learned there when we think about our fiscal guardrails.
I think no doubt every iteration of government faces different challenges. I think it's impossible to look at revenue without looking at expense and looking at what, the movement of time does, whether that's, population growth with a fast-growing province. I don't know if Albertans think of it this way, but as the province grows, on a per capita level, we continue to, dissipate the potency of our bitumen royalties. We only have so many royalties, but the population continues to grow. So on an impact per person, as the province grows, it will continue to decrease. When you couple that with what we've seen with costs, whether that's construction costs for government infrastructure, which have gone up at least 30% in the last 5 years. You have less of that benefit per capita, but you still have the need to build the things that cost more money. So I do think that you need to look at you need to look at revenue and expense separately, but to truly understand the story in a moment in time, I think it's impossible to separate those two things.
Thank you for that. And through the chair to the minister, I will just comment that population has not increased by a factor of 4, and non-renewable resource royalties have. And so I think we can, give that some consideration.
You also have to be clear, not only inflation, but also compensation. 54% of the operating expense of government is in public sector.
I appreciate that.
Seen what's happened over that time.
Through the chair to the minister, we won't get into a conversation about what happened to public sector compensation over the last 12 years, because I think that'll get us into a mess, both here and with public sector workers. So through the chair, in the budget year, production will be at record highs, and non-renewable resource royalties will be the 4th highest on record. And note that in 23-24, that was the highest. And the second highest was in 24-25. The third highest was 25-26. And now we're in the 4th highest. All since those 4 high record numbers, all with the current premier in the government that was elected in 2023. Through the chair to the minister, can you explain to Albertans the out-of-control deficits that we see, all in the light of near record high growth and production, energy production, and the government receiving the 4th highest on record of resource revenue?
Well, I think you have to look back at some of those years and what actually happened, right? I've said this many times. No jurisdiction in the world has paid off $15 billion in debt. No jurisdiction in the world has doubled the size of their sovereign wealth fund, in our case, the Heritage Fund. And that's the other part of the fiscal rules that we touched on briefly. It's doing the right thing when you are in a surplus cash position, and then weathering the deficit cycle. So I think that's part of the vision for the province that's hard to see in a 3-year budget. Having a plan to limit spending growth, because really how do Albertans feel the roller coaster ride? They see ratcheted up spending to catch up. We're behind. We have an infrastructure deficit. All these things that needed to be done, and then we hit the hard years, and you see the dramatic cuts. by keeping that line smooth, population growth plus inflation, doing the right thing in the good years, every dollar going to improve our net position one way or the other through debt repayment or investments, and then weathering the deficit cycles. You made a comment about, was it the TOOM article or one of the articles you're referencing? If Albertans are uncomfortable weathering the deficit cycles, they have no problem with what we've done in surplus years. If they're uncomfortable with the deficit cycles, then if they want to fill that gap, if they want more stability, it will have to come through taxes in some form.
And I'll stop there. Thanks through the chair to the minister. Just a couple of comments before I keep going. That, of course, no other government I think that we know of that also got a tripling of non-renewable resource royalties to $25 billion, allowing the payoff of debt and putting some money to the Heritage Fund. That's a bonus that most governments don't get. And we can have a conversation at another time, perhaps in the Peace Lounge, about whether or not Albertans are comfortable with deficit or not. But we also know that we moved through these past few years. We also know that we moved into the post-payout period for oil sands. This both radically increases the royalty rate, but also makes us move into considering the sliding scale to which royalties are paid. So not only have we moved from like a 1 to 3% royalty rate to a 30 to 40% royalty rate, but the royalty rate escalates as the price of oil goes up too. So that results in, like, setting aside the per capita basis, the budget being more sensitive to the price of oil today and more on the resource roller coaster than we were in the past. Last year, when presenting the budget for 25-26, the minister suggested that delaying the promised personal income tax cut to 2027 might have been needed to get closer to balance. And just 2 weeks ago, while speaking at the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, as you said, sometimes we're in the same circles, the minister again suggested the budget is challenging given that tax cut. And so through the chair to the minister, fiscally speaking, does the minister believe the personal income tax cut was the right thing to do? And if I could ask a follow-on, what is the foregone revenue of that tax cut? So if that personal tax cut had stayed in place, what would be the difference in personal income tax revenue for 2026?
Yeah, I'll ask my team to follow up. I believe it's 1.2 to 1.4 billion is the impact. I would say this, it's important for elected people to do what they say they're going to do. Premier made it clear that this was a commitment in the election. Happy that we could follow through with that for Albertans. We did delay it. We saw the population wave that was coming our way. I've also been clear that this day we could see coming, inching towards us, seeing the need for schools, what it was doing to the capital plan, just the challenges of a growing province. Also, affordability is still the number one thing that we hear about.
Can I use that as a segue?
Just a sec. It's still the number one thing that we hear about, right? And I know that, despite our back and forth in the House in question period, I know you all understand that as well. And there's very few levers that we have as a government to impact everybody. And this is a way to impact those in that lowest bracket at a time when we feel that the balance sheet of the province is able to withstand this better than many Albertan households were. So to your question, am I glad we did it? I am. Does it make this job more challenging? It does, but still believe it was the right thing to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that response. Again, through the chair, if I continue, last year, Minister, we talked a little bit, mentioned that it was actually member Armstrong Homenuk that had previously mentioned that approximately 40% of working Albertans aren't actually paying taxes, that they are in that lower bracket. they're maybe not filing their taxes, or they have credits and the things that are going against their taxes. So we have had conversation before about whether or not that tax cut applies to those 40%. I'm going to expand on this a little bit. The government continually states that Alberta is the lowest taxed jurisdiction in the country. And with patience from the chair, I'll share some personal income tax rates for 2026. Alberta's new lowest rate is 8% on income of 61,200 or less. That is higher than all three territories and the provinces of Ontario, which charges only 5.5% on income of 53,891, or less than British Columbia, that charges only 5.6% on incomes of 50,363 or less. The government of Alberta reports that median income in Alberta is approximately $63,400, suggesting that nearly half of working Albertans are below the lowest tax threshold of 61,200. So being below that threshold means that they're not really gaining on that lower tax cut. That most of that gain is going to be going to people who are above that. And so with nearly half of working Albertans at an 8% rate, and with 5 other jurisdictions in Canada charging lower rates for people in that same income group, how can the government say that Alberta is the most competitively taxed jurisdiction in Canada? When making that statement, you're ignoring half of working Albertans.
No, you're ignoring the fact that we don't have a sales tax on those folks as well. Every time they go to the store to buy milk or baby formula or anything that they need, that is a major impact to households. 16.9 billion is our tax advantage if you overlaid BC's tax structure on Alberta. And that doesn't include the personal income tax cuts that or personal income tax increases that they've just announced in their budget. So that's somewhat old data. You're right. I believe our numbers show us that about 38% of Albertans would be in that grouping that wouldn't pay a PIT. And there's a number of reasons for that. The highest basic personal exemption in the country. High level of credits and ability to work with family and spousal credits. So I think to your question about who sees it, no, I can't cut your taxes if you don't pay taxes. I think that's fairly obvious. But we need to continue, if you're going to be a low tax jurisdiction, which we are, you have to stand behind those broad advantages and understand that, the segments of the population that are, both paying taxes and revenue and consuming services. I think going forward, Albertans do need to understand who's using services, what services actually cost, and where our revenue comes from.
Through the chair to the minister, I will say it's in pulling in the sales tax into the conversation, there's a whole lot embedded there. I think it's disingenuous to the people who are below that first threshold, just to kind of like discount them in that way. So I'll ask again, so the benefit to that tax cut, if we look at the top 10% of income earners, what percentage of the tax benefit accrues to that top 10%?
I might have to ask Lynn, and we'd have to get into that.
Maybe you can come back with that in a moment, because I know that when it comes to personal income taxes, Alberta does have a distinct advantage over other provinces as you move up the income scale. If you earn more, you have a clear income tax advantage over other provinces in Alberta. When the UCP government was elected in 2019, one of the first acts was to reduce the corporate income tax to 8%. The argument being that lower taxes generate larger revenues. I'd like the minister to provide some detail on the corporate income tax. And through the chair, with some patience, I'll also pull in some other references. According to report Head of the Class 2023, published in September 2025, ATB reports 132 companies with headquarters registered in Alberta that have combined revenue greater than 500 billion and an average revenue of 13 billion. What percentage of the corporate income tax receipts of the province come from these largest companies? And what is the foregone revenue from those companies alone had the corporate income tax stayed at 12% or lowered to 10%?
Well, I think if you want those kind of detailed numbers, Lyndon will try to get them. But I'll ask you this, please don't make a bunch of homework for my team or expect that this is gonna be a long list of written submissions. I'm
I don't
happy
have
with,
many more.
I'm happy with the back and forth, and I'm happy to answer your questions, but I don't wanna make a bunch of work for these folks. But we'll try to get you that. I think you can't just look at percentages and make assumptions. You know, we believe that encourages more companies to be headquartered here, to choose Alberta, to, you know, be the home base for their business. Just changing the rate up and down and not understanding what some of those other moving parts would be, I think would be reckless. We've seen corporate income tax increase greatly at a lower rate. And that's what we stand behind. These are people that are creating jobs. It's not luck that we've created more jobs than any other place in the country. If it wasn't for Alberta, Canada would have had a net negative job number for last year. So we're proud of the fact that we're a place that people are choosing to set up their corporation, create those jobs in some exciting, exciting sectors like aerospace. You've seen what de Havilland did, leaving two different provinces to choose Alberta. You know, they had operations in British Columbia and in Quebec, and that's a value proposition that we want to keep. Think will serve the province well.
As through the chair to the minister, I very well know that there are a number of factors at play when a company chooses to locate or relocate. And appreciate that shortly after dropping corporate taxes, there were companies that moved their headquarters out of Alberta, even after having been granted a lower corporate tax rate. In 2024, this government passed the Real Property Governance Act. This act requires that all agencies, boards, and commissions compile lists of unused and underutilized assets, and that those assets be transferred to the Ministry of Infrastructure at the government's discretion. Are there any assets that have been transferred to infrastructure that are now being considered for sale to close the budget deficit? Are there any Crown Corps or subsidiaries of Crown Corps that are maybe considered to be on the chopping block? Is the government considering the sale of ATB or AFSC to close the budget gap?
When it comes to the specific infrastructure questions related to the real property governance change, I think you should direct those to the Minister of Infrastructure. There's nothing specific in there that we've had a back and forth with the Treasury Board and Finance and Infrastructure as far as things that we would be looking to sell. When it comes to ATB, have had no conversations, or I think I told you this last year, no intentions to sell ATB. There have been offers, as I understand it, over the years, or, people that have asked the question, would the government be interested in that? But we're not. We think that is an asset, in our consolidated books, that will continue to grow. We think it serves the province well. I think they have 22% of the deposit share in the province. I could probably get ATB up here to give you some details if you'd like, but no, there's no conversations about the sale of ATB at this time.
Thank you for that. Through the chair, I'm sure that there have been offers for ATB because their financial performance is pretty good. According to AIMCO's reporting, the 10-year rate of return for the agency is 7.4%. On page 149 of the fiscal plan, it estimates the balance of the Heritage Trust Fund to be $29.9 billion in 2026. I've verbally heard some numbers that are maybe slightly higher than that. The goal is to increase the value of the fund to $250 billion by 2050. We know that it is highly unlikely that there will be deposits to the fund in 26, 27, or 28. At a compound rate of return of 7.4% for 24 years, bringing us to 2050, the fund would stand at approximately 166 billion, far short of the target. With no additional cash deposits, the fund would need to earn a rate of 9.15% to reach that $250 billion target. Does the minister believe that an annual rate of return for the next 25 years of 9.15% is achievable?
I'll start at the beginning, because there's a lot of different numbers that get used regarding the Heritage Fund. There's market value, there's book value, there's ending calendar year, ending fiscal year. So we believe it will be at 32.1 billion by the end of March. That's correct, Aaron? So if you're using that as a starting point, you would need just under 9% compounded over 25 years to hit the target. The 10-year period you referenced, I think it's important to understand that the direction regarding the investment asset mix, SIP and G, the Statement of Investment Policies and Goals that came from my department on behalf of the Treasury Board, hadn't been updated in a very long time. They're actually still in that process right now with the new corporation, Heritage Fund Opportunities Corp. We'll be having that discussion with AIMCO regarding, the risk they're willing to take, the type of assets, the timeline. So I think it's important to understand that in a lot of ways, the Heritage Fund over the years was invested not much differently than a lot of the pensions invest. It didn't have a 25-year growth period. It wasn't patient. It wasn't wanting to make withdrawals every year. So that change alone, we would expect would have a fairly dramatic impact on actual returns. If you're going to invest it like a pension plan because you plan on taking the historically the 1 billion, the 1.2 billion every year, maybe that works. But we do want to ensure that it has an asset class that is looking out that far into the future. But I would also say it doesn't require further deposits to hit the mark. Like I said, it would be just under 9%. The last 5 years, they've done about 8.8 net of fees. You referenced a 10-year number. So I think it's certainly in the realm, and I wouldn't say it's conservative, but we do have high expectations with best-in-class team, global expertise from within Alberta expertise. We think it's going to work.
Thank you for that. Through the chair to the minister, I think we'll see over time, clearly to achieve a higher rate of return requires a higher rate of risk. And the degree to which we're willing to put those assets at risk to earn that return, maybe that's a conversation for another day, maybe in committee over the Heritage Fund. 25 years is a long time to forecast, to be hopeful that we'll achieve 9% 25 years, year after year into the future.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I'd just say it's also a more reasonable timeline to look at returns broadly. Any 5-year span, any 10-year span, you're gonna have those periods. But historically, if you look back over a time of 25, I think it's a lot more predictable, the way the markets will react.
I would agree on that, which is why I would lean more towards the 10-year than the 5-year. That's why I kind of lean more towards the 7.4 than the 8.8. But through the chair, to the minister, this is perhaps a longer conversation. But in looking forward those 25 years into the future and the goal of the Heritage Fund, I think we also need to consider that if our operating budget continues to increase by 3% year over year, our operating expenses would double to 140 billion by 2050. And so when we're considering how much is in the Heritage Fund, the rate of return that we're getting, and what kind of operating expenses do we want to cover, that you would continue to need to earn that 9% a year on the 250 billion to cover even less than 20% of operating expenses in 2050. And so, again, maybe not a conversation that we have today, but curious over time, how do we continue to have, does the minister have plans for those ongoing honest conversations with Albertans about the future value of the Heritage Trust Fund? I guess what I'll just say is that it's sometimes difficult to have conversations. People feel affordability pinches today, affordability pressures today. It's difficult to look forward and say, like, I'm going to get this benefit 25 years from now. That's the reason the federal government created the Canada Pension Plan, is that people were kind of more in the today than they were in the tomorrow. And so does the minister have, I guess, some thoughts about those conversations with Albertans about what do we really want to achieve? What do we really want from the fund in 25 years? And bringing Albertans along to appreciate that and willingness to be patient with that investment.
Yeah, no doubt, expenses will continue to increase over that time, and it's a long time horizon. I look at it this way, we historically, from Ralph, from the times of, paid in full, very proud province to be debt-free at that moment in time. We go to the capital markets and borrow money when we're in a deficit. We don't when we're in a surplus. Historically, we haven't been treated well by the capital markets. Our debt servicing hasn't been reflective of our strong balance sheet. So I think if Albertans understand that the capital markets want to see us at the markets maybe more frequently, don't come one every 3 years, come every year, but at a lesser amount, plan it out, keep your debt servicing down, and plan for the future. Focusing on this net position, as long as Albertans are focusing on our net position, then you should believe that whether that dollar goes to debt repayment or in the Heritage Fund, those things are equal when we're looking at our books, but one has a chance to grow. If we do look at the 5-year or use the 10, they would be similar. 8.8% versus 3.7%. Our debt is costing us. So there's an opportunity to grow. Expenses are going to grow with that as well. But when you get to 2050, if you map this out over 25 years, use whatever percentage you want, use 8%, use 9%, and get there. The investment income in those last years, when the fund gets to that size, would be in a position where you could take, let's say, 10 billion off a year, and it would still be growing by 6 billion, 7 billion, and continue to grow out into the future. So that purchasing power, the ability of what we can do with that 10 billion will be less in 25 years than it is now, but it equates to, using the sales tax calculation you asked us for, like an 8% sales tax today. That's the power of what it'll be. And I think if you can show me a better plan of how to deal with this, is the best plan I've ever seen in the history of Alberta for how to manage this, I'm all ears. But I think if Albertans are able to weather these deficit years, understand that it's better to put this on our balance sheet, then it isn't really impacting them today, and we're growing that fund for the future.
Thank you, Minister, through the chair. It is clear that, yes, $10 billion 25 years from now is significantly less than $10 billion today. It's also a much smaller share of the operating budget 25 years from now. But I'll move on a little bit to talk about the population growth and maybe ask some questions about the population growth. The vision statement of the strategic plan reads, in recent years, the province's population growth has grown faster than any other Canadian jurisdiction, leading to unique challenges, particularly during these economically volatile times. This rapid population growth has led to these unique challenges, or demand on healthcare and education infrastructure outpacing the ability to provide quality service. Emergency room wait times are up. Overcrowding of classrooms is commonly cited complaints of Albertans. On page 35 of the fiscal plan, it is acknowledged that near-term economic growth will be dampened by slower population growth. That suggests it is understood that population growth also leads to economic growth. In our discussion last year, we talked about how migration does lead to economic growth, but the minister shared that it takes, maybe 12 to 18 months for people to find a job and get settled and be paying taxes and buying a home. We can also see on page 150 of government estimates allocations for immigration and newcomer integration. These are valuable investments as Alberta grows. But I'd like to pursue the conversation regarding additional expenses related to newcomers coming to Alberta. As I said earlier, the fiscal plan alludes to these challenges faced by population growth. The Premier has suggested that those non-permanent resident status are resulting in higher costs for social programs, healthcare, and education. But the budget doesn't break down those expenses. Forgive me, I might ask for some more homework. Most non-permanent residents come to Canada and Alberta to work. According to Statistics Canada, total non-permanent resident migration to Canada totaled 800,000 in 2023. This is the peak year. It's estimated that 10% or 80,000 were not temporary foreign workers or international students. And before I continue, I would like to ask just one question. Can the minister confirm that temporary foreign workers coming to Alberta are paying taxes in Alberta?
Yeah, certainly. I'm just looking at Dana's computer here. So the stats are hard to break down just because they're not collected in this way, but we do know that non-permanent residents accounted for approximately 152 million in provincial personal income tax paid. That would be from 2023, which I think is the latest year's stats we have available. So I know when the Premier's talked about some of those, per capita costs around healthcare and education. I think it's been referenced that on a per capita basis, it would be about 1.9 billion in the healthcare, 600 million in education. Important to understand that there's a net position here, and that's what we're trying to determine on the tax side. But yeah, you're not wrong. In Alberta, it takes a while. We don't have a consumption tax that taxes, immediate economic activity, so you do have to get tethered to the labor market. We've had a high unemployment rate. Even though we're creating more jobs, it didn't align with the wave of people of that size. We are expecting that to come down from highs of 7.7 and 7.8. I think we're predicting 6.6 for this year. So I guess the pendulum always is swinging. It definitely swung too far, in my opinion, for Canada, and Alberta got maybe more than our share compared to the other provinces because we do have cheaper housing, more opportunity, and now it's swung back hard the other way. It will allow the labor market to tighten. It'll allow us to catch up on capital and services, but we will need 2% population growth consistently to replace ourselves and move forward as a province. So I think that's something that shouldn't be lost on anybody as well.
Understood. Thank you, Minister, through the chair. I think you have some numbers there that I guess we'll have to look for some further data to see that, if NPRs are contributing only 152 million out of personal income taxes, it seems a bit on the surface, it seems a bit distorted that they're paying like a very tiny portion of personal income taxes and a higher proportion of healthcare.
So in healthcare, the things I cited, that's simply per capita. So there's assumptions built in there. This is an actual from 2023 on income tax.
There is an article that I found in the Globe and Mail through the chair from the 28th of February 2026, what healthcare for newcomers costs. The article suggests that the government of Alberta estimates that non-permanent residents make up approximately 5% of the population and cost the primary healthcare system $100 million each year. That would be less than 1% of the total primary healthcare budget. And so I'll ask the minister, do those numbers sound accurate, that that NPRs are 5% of the population and that primary healthcare is about $100 million?
I think 5% sounds a little high. I think the number we have is about 281,000 non-permanent residents. So we just exceeded 5 million people, so I think that's a little elevated. And the second part of your question was,
100 million for primary care alone.
I'd have to dig into how they're achieving that number.
And through the chair, I'll also ask the minister, how much does the province receive from the feds to cover healthcare costs for refugees or those seeking asylum?
Federal health transfer number you're looking for, or a specific program?
Just specifically for refugees, those seeking asylum. It's a separate item from the feds.
Might have to defer you to health.
In the article through the chair, the article that I referenced earlier, it was referencing Dr. Falconer, a research professor at the University of Calgary. He says that immigrants use fewer health services than non-migrants and cost the system less on a per person basis. And maybe we'll have to defer this to also to health. Do we have an understanding of the per capita expense for non-permanent residents versus permanent residents and citizens?
Lyndon, I don't think we have that breakdown that specific. No. But to your other point, yeah, you were closer than me. It's 5.6% of the population.
So a little bit higher than what I suggested there.
Yeah. Maybe I just would say this, and I'm not trying to take your time, but also important to understand. So we've already referenced that 38% of Albertans don't pay tax, right? So a lot of these folks would be low income that we're speaking about. They may fit in that bracket. I think it's also just important to understand that as we're going through this, we're just trying to figure out who is paying, who isn't, and then when it comes to immigration policy, ensure that we are, targeting the roles that we need. Otherwise, we do get this gap in our revenue and our costs continue to.
I appreciate that. Through the chair to the minister, I'll keep going a little bit in this, and I'm gonna shift gears. That it's true that many of them are going to be earning minimum wage and going to be lower income earners. So it again then maybe questions why we would be asking them to pay for their health care when we're already acknowledging that they're low income earners, putting additional pressure on them. Through the chair to the minister, last year the contingency was adjusted to $4 billion, citing increases to public sector wages and tariff threats. In last year's estimates, the minister shared that Alberta was the first province to include tariff threats in the budget, and set the possibility, I think it was 15% across all exported goods. And in reviewing last year's discussion, I noted that it was included not only in contingency, but I asked a question about the differential and the elevated differential over private sector forecasts, and that tariff threat was also embedded in that differential. Now, if I'm not mistaken, most of Alberta's exports to the United States were tariff-free through 2025. However, there were significant tariffs imposed on agricultural exports to China in 2025. And through the chair to the minister, can you share any details on the real impacts of tariffs to Alberta's economy, including change in GDP, employment, farm receipts, and any government expenditures or supports to farmers as they face those tariff penalties from China?
Okay, there's a lot there. Back in budget 25, and you'll all recall, at that time, we were hearing, a range of things from the U.S. administration around what we could expect the tariffs to be in the end. The 15% we thought was kind of not an average of the rhetoric that we'd heard, but we thought it was something that was plausible. We didn't think 25% was in any way possible for the U.S. or for us, considering, you know, our basket of exports is dominated by energy. So what we've seen play out over the course of the year, we think that we have a actual impact more in the range of 3% when it comes to the U.S. tariffs specifically, or even slightly lower. And a lot of that would be because I think we're 81 or 2% energy, and that's energy with petrochemical and agriculture, which both weren't tariffed over the course of this year in that way. When it comes to canola, specifically in China, had many discussions with the federal colleagues. You know, that's the one that we see and feel and hear about the most in Alberta, but also pork and seafood across the country were impacted similarly for some of the other provinces, Manitoba and the Maritimes. When it comes to getting specific help for that impact, you know, we've been clear that, you know, if Canada's gonna receive the receipts on their counter tariffs, they need to find ways to deliver those funds back to the people that are most impacted. They've done a good job, I think, in the manufacturing sector. We've seen some promising conversations on timber. But this is what we see, this tit for tat. It's, I think the Chinese administration's been clear that they did that in response to the EV tariff that the federal government put on Chinese electric vehicles. So these things, they have a real impact. When you get into farm receipts, it's hard to break it down, I would say, the tariff impact, because they vary so much year to year just on the conditions of the year, weather and rain impacts yield in such a big way. But they have, we have set some records lately for grain exports through the ports. And it sounds like we're getting somewhere with the feds and alleviating what we can control when it comes to some of these more global tariffs. For the U.S. administration, I would just say, we don't forecast rhetoric. I said this last year. We try to make our best assumptions on what's plausible. So I have been asked about, you know, CUSMAs being renegotiated this summer. For the most part, our forecast reflects what I'd call as maybe a status quo of the conditions we've been under this year. We still don't think it makes any sense for them to come and tariff energy specifically, especially considering everything that's going around them. You know, they're depleting their strategic reserve. We basically are their strategic reserve. So we think that's sound, but yeah, we would expect a status quo, even though CUSMA's going to be a big deal here this summer.
Thank you for that, Minister. I think it's fair to say that we, through the chair, I think it's fair to say that we have learned over the past year, when it comes to global trade relationships, we can't really forecast anything. It seems to change by the minute, and it's not just the United States causing those changes. I have only 1 minute and 43 seconds remaining in this block. So maybe I'll just set this up for continuing the next time we come back. I believe that our friends in Ontario and British Columbia took a more significant economic hit from tariffs on their exports than we did. The contingency in the budget under discussion has returned to $2 billion. It is true that at this time, public sector salary increases have now been included in the budget of each ministry. And we can only hope that we have a period of tariff stability. As you talked about this year, maybe we're thinking about more of like a 3%, not 15%. Although nothing in the relationship with the United States today can be taken for granted. Even if we do negotiate a new deal, that doesn't mean that they're going to stick to it. But in my closing minute, Chair, there's another threat on the horizon that I wonder if we should be including in our contingency or our considerations, and that is the threat of separation. The debate is already underway.
I would like to see the member reference somewhere in the business plan, the budget, or the strategic plan that separation is a part of this. This is 23B, and I would say that he needs to get back to the wonderful meeting at hand, because it's pretty clear that he is, he's really straying pretty far away. And so far, Mr. Chair, through the meetings that we've had so far, we've been doing very well. But you haven't allowed any of these questions to move forward because they're not part of these estimates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this isn't a point of order. I will say that one, the member didn't even get his question fully completed and out before it was already interjected. The word separatism is not a point of order in general. Maybe if the member had waited for the question to be, or the statement to be completed, it would have just been general. To be clear though, the member is speaking about contingency planning and contingency funds, and the conversation around the future of our province is part of a contingency conversation. And so this is not a point of order. I think the government needs to be a little bit less concerned about the sensitivity around one word and maybe allow the member to finish his statement.
You?
The past point of orders that we've done on this, they start off with separation and then they finalize it with a separation question. So in the end, really this is just a smokescreen, if you will. They're just trying to confuse the situation. Let's stick to the estimates, sir. Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly what he's doing.
All right, so I do thank you both for this. I think at the end of the day, member, I would just caution, you asked some very good questions. I think we had a very good meeting so far. But speculating on things that may or may not happen outside of estimates isn't something that this committee has purview over. So I would appreciate, I think the committee would appreciate that expectation. So if we can leave out that conversation. I don't know where you were going with the end of your question, but if it was pertaining to the budget, I'm happy to hear the question. This time I won't call it a point of order, but let's keep it on the rails on specifically on what the future is and not speculate upon what could or could not happen in the future.
Thank you, but I do believe that we're out of that time block.
You are correct. I apologize, member. So we are going back over to the government side, so you have a 20-minute block for questions. I'm going to ask a question. I assume that we're going to go back and forth during this block too as well, member and minister. Back and forth is fine with you? Sounds like. Excellent. So you can see this time. This is a caucus block, so you can see the 20 time after you're done your questions. To somebody else in the future, it will be member only. I saw member Armstrong Hominick. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, through you to the Minister, first of all. Minister, thank you for all the hard work you do. I know it's not an easy job, and it's a very challenging job, especially in the times we're in now. So I want to thank you and your staff for all the hard work you do. Minister, I would like to ask about Treasury Board and Finance's role, both in upholding the fiscal framework and in public sector bargaining. Page 173 of the business plan states that the government will maintain year-over-year operating expense growth, or at both population growth plus inflation. Further, it states the Provincial Bargaining and Compensation Office, the PBCO, within Treasury Board and Finance, represents the Government of Alberta's interest as both an employer and as a funder with respect to public sector labor relations and compensation. I understand last year a number of public sector negotiations were settled. Chair, through you to the Minister. Minister, could you explain how public sector settlements impacted Budget 2026, and how does the government justify the compensation costs that resulted from the established bargaining framework, and why did the government choose a 3% over 4-year structure?
Well, I guess I would just start saying that, that's where the data took the bargaining team. We were clear at the beginning of that process that, this, Alberta couldn't afford to be an outlier. We didn't want to return to those years where we were well out of market. That then was followed by, years of zeros or very small increases. So we first recognized that, you know, we were going to have substantial increases, at this round of bargaining, to keep up. You know, post-COVID, we saw some big deals signed all around us. We look at that data, but then we also look at, specifically the jurisdictions where there's a lot of labor mobility for those specific roles, whether you're looking at, you know, nurses specifically or any of the occupations. We try to really look at an Ontario West, we call it. That's where we see a lot of that labor mobility and where you're actually, you know, fighting and trying to recruit those people. And we know that we have recruitment, you know, and retention challenges in specific areas. So, you know, landing at, you know, the base rate settlement, which you've seen similar ones happen all around us, but also having, you know, targeted adjustments for specific roles, you know, that were maybe further behind, we felt was necessary. It impacts this budget in a big way. 54% of our operational expenses in public sector compensation. That includes physicians. So 7.7 billion in this budget for physicians. Every ministry and department, substantial increases in their targets and in the out years directly relate to the deals that we've seen. But we stuck with the data, focused on, you know, what the data was telling us, and we think that we have a position now where we're in the high end of market, but we're not out of market, which I think Albertans should appreciate. And you know, a lot of these roles as we grow, we still do need to create these spaces and attract people to choose Alberta to be home. So very impactful, but I think we did the right thing, and it's good to have. I think we have 92.5% of the deals now complete, or I should say the value of the deals, the dollars in the deals complete. There's quite a few smaller tables that still need to be completed. But yeah, we stand by that it was the right thing to do for the province.
Thank you, Minister. And Chair, through you again to you, Minister. On page 175 of the 2026 business plan, under outcome 1, key objective 1.1 states that the goal is to lessen the province's reliance on resource revenues over the long term and pay down debt. Minister, through you, through the chair, how are you going to reduce our reliance on resource revenues and diversify Alberta's economy to ensure we don't find ourselves in this situation again? And also how does the budget 2026 help prepare Alberta for future economic uncertainty, particularly by strengthening fiscal resilience, maintaining responsible spending, and ensuring the province can respond effectively to changing global economic conditions?
It's a good question. Just give you some stats. Outside of oil and gas extraction, investment is forecast to accelerate and grow 6%, or about $2.5 billion in 2026, and average around 7%, or $3.5 billion from 2027 to 2029. Other initiatives like the value-added tax credit in agriculture continue to bring in billions in investment. And if you look at the pie chart of our economy, Alberta's never been more diversified. And I think if Alberta leans into you know, our broad-based advantages, you know, certainly we have all the resources, but by focusing on broad-based advantages, especially around taxation, you know, we're not picking winners and losers. We're taking all comers, whether you're in, you know, fintech or aerospace or defense. You know, we're open for business. We continue to cut, you know, needless, burdensome regulations at a rate that no other province does. So that's our value proposition, that we're not picking winners and losers. We're leaning into our advantages as a province. It's always difficult when you have something like the energy sector here in Alberta where we have royalties and you see the dramatic impact to our revenue line. That isn't the case with every other sector that's, you know, creating jobs and paying taxes. And it was asked in a previous question, you know, those royalties are more impactful now than they were in years past. I think we do have 82% of the bitumen plays in post payout, and that's why you do see a dramatic change in that sensitivity, which I don't know if it makes us more reliant on it, but it makes it more volatile. So, you know, in budget 25, you know, we estimated when we were closer to that $70 range that we had about $750 million per change in WTI. In budget 26, when we're forecast at 60, it's about 650 million, and that's because of the royalty structures is on a curve and you get less per barrel at a lower price. So that's a great advantage. Does create challenges for budgeting and forecasting, but to the heart of your question, the way we continue to diversify is by being open for business, having those broad-based advantages, and not chasing, I'd say, niche or boutique, you know, investment incentives. Sticking to our guns and saying we are going to be a low-tax jurisdiction. It's beautiful. We have mountains and trees and prairies and every landscape you can imagine, lower housing costs, and leaning into everything that's an advantage in Alberta.
Thank you, Minister. Chair, I'd like to cede my time, the rest of my time, to my colleague, MLA Sear.
Well, thank you, Minister, and you've been very forthright with us today, and I appreciate that. Your team has done a fantastic job, especially with these challenging conditions that we're under. Minister, you're probably, I know that we've had this discussion before, but you know that I was on the Alberta Heritage Trust Fund Committee way back in my first term from 2015 to 2019. And it was always a concern that I had, that I was seeing that those funds were being withdrawn, and we're not actually seeing any real growth or planned growth during that time. And it's good to see that and our government is moving forward with trying to leave a nest egg for our future generations. Now, one of the things that I would say that is important in all of this is I kind of like to have a bit of an understanding of what you see as history going back, and kind of where you see the fund going in the future. I recognize that our colleagues kind of touched on this. So, and I've got other questions on the Alberta Heritage Trust Fund, but if you can kind of give me an idea of what your vision is, what is it that you see is the path for our youth?
Yeah, well, great question. I do think that this is important for all Albertans. You know, I think it's a great thing, started in '76 by Premier Lougheed. You know, it's been called many things. It's been called a rainy day fund. It's been called the fund that'll be there when the oil runs out. And I know you've all heard all of these things, but I think Albertans broadly always really appreciated it, but I don't know if it really was tied to a clear goal for the future. And that's why I think it's good to set timelines, have an understanding of what that will mean in 2050, the ability to take 10 billion in revenue off of that time. Although 10 billion won't mean as much as 10 billion today, we all understand that. So I think in years past, it wasn't an afterthought, but I think it did become easy for governments to take the retained earnings. You know, I think that was important to change the default position where you have to make a political decision if you want to make a withdrawal now. Otherwise, the retained earnings just stay in it. Otherwise, in the past, they basically came out automatically and went to general revenue. I think it was inflation protected at 4% or something. And then every, once a decade or a government would find themselves in a surplus position and maybe make a deposit. But that's why you saw such meager growth from 1976 to 2019, basically. The fund, we've talked about the governance and the creation of the Heritage Fund Opportunities Corp. I think it's good to have, more oversight. It's good to get that, although the people that have managed it historically in my department, I think, have done a great job. It's good to get that global expertise, best-in-class governance, and have a plan for the future. You see this happening elsewhere around the world. You see this being attempted in Canada. Quebec is, they have a $2 billion line item in their budget every year. They're borrowing money to build a fund to do what we're doing. I think it's important for us to understand that we have such a great head start. We don't have to do that. We can use our great head start and ensure the retained earnings stay in the fund. Focus on that net debt position, and have something that'll be a tangible revenue tool in the future for Albertans. It's this is because of our great resource wealth. It's done great by Alberta in the past. Provides us the ability to have great tax advantages in the here and now. Keeping life more affordable for Albertans in real time, but also, providing that comfort in the future that we're doing the right thing with this. And I know there's always comparisons to Norway. I don't know if Albertans know that Norway came to Alberta to talk to the government at the time after they'd started the fund because they thought it was such a great idea. But went two very different paths. Norway put their royalty revenues in the fund and kept a high tax rate. So I don't know what the combined tax rate is in Norway, but it's, it's high VAT, high consumption tax, and the fund is continued to grow, and now they manage trillions of dollars. So we've gone down two different paths, but best time to plant a tree, either 20 years ago or right now. So I think it's never too late to do the right thing, and this will provide a real revenue opportunity for Albertans of the future and help them deal with some of their no doubt tough decisions then.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And it's good to hear that you're actually putting a plan in for future generations. I know that for my area, we're very reliant on oil and gas up in Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul. I'm always worried someday that once that oil and gas is gone, then what's my area going to do? Because agriculture, well, it's fantastic. It's probably not going to pay the bills, and I see that you're looking forward on not just a Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul view, but you're looking at it as a province and trying to get in front of that. So thank you for that, sir. One of the things that has come up is auto insurance. I recognize that there's been some challenging decisions having to be made. There is a $9.5 million that's been allocated for 26-27 for the continued development and implementation of the Care First auto insurance system. Can you please outline, Minister, what this new auto insurance system will benefit Albertans, and what changes will drive the notice first once the new system comes into effect?
So can you just repeat the end of your question? Sorry, Member, sir.
What changes will drivers notice once this new system comes into effect? It's awkward, but.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So you referenced a couple of line items there. Was it the $9.5 million allocation in 26-27? A lot of this is for implementation of the system, and that's everything right down to education. Education of Albertans and back and forth with the medical communities that are pertinent and the insurance companies. This charge will be cost recovered through the system as well. I should note that. What Albertans can expect to see, so January 1, 2027 is our startup date. So it's coming toward us soon. Right now, Albertans are seeing the second highest premiums in Canada, behind Ontario, still by a substantial margin. I know, not getting partisan, I know they like to say it's the highest in the country, but it's not. It's second highest, and it's almost a $300 delta from the newest statistics that we have. A lot of that is being mitigated right now through, the good driver rate cap and other things that we've put into the system to ensure there's affordability in the short term. It's, distorting the market, can't last forever. So we need to get to this system change. What Albertans can expect to see is, stability in their costs, still expecting savings at this time from the most recent numbers that we have. But more importantly, they're going to see more stability. They're going to see better care. They're not going to have to, use the courts if they need more than $32,000 in a monetary settlement. They'll be able to get those dollars much quicker and receive a higher level of care much quicker. So better care, better access to the system, get Albertans to recover to the highest level possible more quickly, back into their lives, back working and contributing to the economy. So I think they'll see more stability and better care, two most important points.
Through you, the chair. Now, do you see that the former model that they're leaving behind was sustainable, sir?
Well, I'd say it would be sustainable if you were comfortable with, approaching the highest rates in the country. It was our understanding that wasn't the expectation of Albertans, that they wanted insurance to be more affordable. Insurance is a challenging file in the sense that you collect your premiums, you pool them, you pay out your claims. There's things in Alberta that make the auto insurance file maybe a little more challenging than other jurisdictions. We drive more valuable vehicles on average because of higher wages, seeing the inflationary costs in vehicles especially over the last few years. Being on the east side of the Rockies, we do have more hail than a lot of other provinces.
Thank you, members. Thank you, Minister, for your questions and your responses. We will now be going to 10-minute blocks, so maximum 5 minutes of speaking time at any period of time. During this period, or after this next period, we will take a 5-minute break. So that'll just as setting expectations for everyone. Minister and member, do you still want to do back and forth, or you want block time?
I'm fine with back and forth.
Perfect. Well, that's what we'll do. Member, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. To pick up where we left off. So I will refer to page 11 of the fiscal plan, where it says the contingency amount is intended to address unanticipated spending, including disasters and emergency priorities that may arise during the year and are not practical to delay until the next budget. I'll also refer to page 248 in the government estimates. The department has a fiscal planning and economic analysis that monitors and provides economic analysis of major issues influencing Alberta's economy and economic development. And so I will ask, given that contingency is about assessing those risks, through the chair to the minister, has the department conducted an assessment of the potential impact of a referendum and the potential impact on Albertans and Alberta's economy in the result of Alberta leaving Canada?
No, the department has not. I don't know if you want to comment, Darren, but no. And to the contingency size more generally, we're swinging back to the fiscal rules. So yes, at the inception of the fiscal rules, we had it at 1.5 billion. So imagine starting from scratch and trying to right size these things. We did increase it to 2, and then increased it to 4. We want to come back to 2 because a lot of those internal pressures, especially around bargaining, are now far clear, and they're in the out years. There's always going to be economic uncertainty that's terribly difficult to forecast and model. Look what's happening in Iran right now. But we still want that rule to bind us in.
Understood.
And there's reasonable exceptions when it comes to disaster and fire and,
So through the chair to the minister, with respect to the economic analysis that the department does, given that the premier has said that that question could be to referendum in October in this fiscal year under discussion, given the survey results from the Calgary Chamber and the Alberta Chambers about the percentage of businesses, 56 and 51% of businesses across the province, citing uncertainty and that this is a risk to them. And given that we have prior experience of other provinces going through this, just putting a question to referendum caused financial and economic harm. Can the minister explain why the team is not assessing this risk?
Sure. Member?
The minister's answered this question with a clear no. 23B and C, so he's repeating the question and continues to repeat the question. I would suggest that we need to move on, because what happens here is that we're dealing with the business plan, the budget, and the strategic plan. The minister has answered his question with a clear answer. There was no movement or ability to be able to come to some other conclusion. So let's move on, Mr. Chair. You've ruled consistently on this matter. I would say that, again, citing the business plan in various different areas doesn't reinforce the fact that it's not there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate what the member opposite is trying to do, and I will also appreciate that there may have been other rulings in other ministries where this conversation came up. However, what I will also cite is page 248, 3, fiscal planning and economic analysis. Monitors and provides economic analysis of major issues influencing Alberta's economy and economic development. The member has just clearly asked, if the analysis has not been done, can the minister please explain, given other jurisdictions have gone through this, why that analysis is not done? To be clear, the word separation has not been used. I'm using it now, but the member never used it. So all we're talking about is economic forecasting.
Thank you very much. This becomes a tricky conversation here, because we have previously, I agree with the member that you didn't use the word separatist or separatism or anything like that. There was a leaning towards that conversation. So, and I think that's a conversation that it's a political question right now. Well, best to avoid. We aren't here for that. Now, saying that, the member is, I appreciate tying to the budget. I would love for us to move on. Now, I will give space for the minister if he would like to choose to answer this question, but I think there's lots of great questions that the member has asked and will continue to ask over the next multiple hours. But I will leave it to the minister to answer the question if he chooses to answer. But, and I guess I have to actually create a ruling. I'm not going to call this a point of order, but it is getting to the point of causing some disruption by coming back to the same, in essence, the same point of order ruling all the time. So I would hope the member would continue to ask very good questions, which he has been prior, so thank you for that, and help keep the train and not be disruptive in the meeting. So it's not a point of order, but we are getting a little cyclical in that. So I'll leave it to the minister to decide, but I would encourage the member to move on.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide an answer, Chair. I would just say when it comes to the fiscal planning and economic analysis branch, they monitor and provide economic analysis of major issues influencing Alberta's economy and economic development, provide tax policy advice and recommendations to promote a system that is fair, efficient, and effective. The issue that's being referenced, this is a citizen-led initiative gathering signatures. That's what it is at this point. We don't, like I said, we don't forecast rhetoric from the President of the United States. We forecast what's real. So even in our production forecast, although we have a signed MOU with the federal government, for example, that we're extremely bullish about and intend to ensure gets built, until those things are actually they're putting pipe in the ground, so to speak, and it's permits approved and very real, that doesn't enter our forecasting scenarios. So I would probably just leave it there, Chair.
Thank you. I will move on. On page 28 of the fiscal plan contains a section entitled Oversupply to Weigh on Global Oil Prices. This section talks about strong supply growth is expected to drive inventory builds weighing on prices. This outlook extends only into 2027. It does say that demand is forecast to firm up in 2027. It goes on to say that ample spare capacity and continued supply growth, particularly from non-OPEC producers, are expected to limit recovery in prices. But then in the document, it also sounds a little bit more positive, that for our primary industry, that oil production and exports boost Alberta's growth, that this opens with strong demand for Alberta's heavy crude. Improving oil prices and expanded pipeline capacity will underpin robust growth in oil production over the forecast period. And I will reference the chair. This section notes oil production increasing by 118,000 barrels a day in 2026. This is indeed good news. The section also notes that 700,000 barrels a day of egress will be added over the next 4 years. This is also good news. This, of course, is resulting in a lower deficit for the province. But it does appear in reading this in context that the efficiencies in addition to both production and egress, so while egress will slightly outpace the addition in production, both cases additional capacity is incremental improvements and efficiency. So we're not considering large production increases through infrastructure builds. So this brings me to the plan to double production out of Alberta. I am very much in favor of our oil and gas industry. The member earlier talked about paying the bills with oil versus paying the bills with agriculture. Let's be clear, there's no other industry that we have ever experienced that brings in money like oil and gas does. I'm not going to deny that. But I am, however, curious that given our previous experience of building the infrastructure build out in the oil sands to bring us to the production today, we're talking about 10 years of planning and building, bringing that oil to production. It was another 10 years of selling that product to pay off those capital costs. So we're talking about a 20-year planning horizon for a company to decide today to go down that path. And so I'll ask the minister, in the conversations that we've had with industry, what is the price of oil that they need to be confident in over a 20-year horizon to make that kind of investment decision?
Okay, a lot there. You kind of went around, but you brought her back. No, I'd say that, like Alberta specifically and the oil sands specifically, I'm not the energy minister, but I think in our conversations, you know, we think that they've done a good job getting their costs down. They've been through a lot over the last few years, you know, seeing oil go to zero and all of the black swan events. So we think their break even is somewhere in the, you know, $35 to $40 range. They might have a different number, but that would be the number that comes to mind for us. I think when it comes to capital being deployed in that space, of course, they would like as much certainty as they could get, but the capital investment on production is always going to follow the room made by egress. It won't go the other way. So the egress potential that you noted, you know, I think it's 700,000 barrels by 2030, you know, largely from more optimization and efficiency through TMX expansion, but also the changes Enbridge has planned. Those are good things. We're seeing things also pop up.
Sorry, Minister, I just have one thing to sneak in before this 10 minutes is up, if I may. Chair, thank you for that response. Chair, and to the Minister, I just want to quickly slide in $900 million loan to APMC and the BRIC program. Can the Minister talk about that $900 million, what it's intended for? And with the BRIC program, do we not consider the BRIC program to be adding additional risk to Albertans in doing a job that oil companies do? And is there any potential upswing to the province or only potential downswing in the BRIC program?
Well, when it comes to BRICS specifically, I might leave some of that to the energy minister, but when it comes to the increase in APMC's, you know, borrowing limit, we're trying to look at what the actual costs are on sturgeon, map that out over a period of years and have that room built in. The sturgeon play, you know, I don't know if Darren has that number, but I think they're 300 million loss this year.
All right, well, that wraps up this question block. I did promise a quick break for 5 minutes. We'll be try to stay on point for 5 minutes, so looking forward to that. See you all in 5. Excellent. Well, welcome back, everyone. We look forward to starting off the second half of this meeting for the next hour. I'm turning to members over here. Sorry. No, we just went over here. We are back over here. I apologize. Minister and Member Yao, are we doing back and forth or block time?
Back and forth.
Back and forth works. Perfect. From now on, I'm just going to consider it's back and forth and for so far for the rest of the meeting, at least of this morning meeting. Member Yao, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. Minister, I appreciate all your great hard work.
I didn't get to really finish that.
Perfect. I was
Question.
gonna ask you that.
Okay, the question that was brought up regarding brick, I would let Energy, answer that in detail, but the way the question was asked is there upside here, is there only downside? I guess from our perspective, make sure that there's, guardrails in place and that it would move slowly and then prove itself through those stages if it would, continue and become part of a larger program. So let Energy answer that in greater detail, but from our perspective, has to have guardrails and, proof of concept as it moves along. But no, we wouldn't do this if there was only downside.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Minister. Again, I just want to say the function that you do is enormous, and I appreciate all the hard work you do. You have to make all the hard decisions for our entire government, but I just want to really especially congratulate you on the fact that you've been able to pay down our debt as well as invest in our Heritage Savings Trust Fund. Those are two things that are very, very important to me. In fact, as a self-professed fiscal conservative, it's fantastic, and I thank you for maintaining that and continuing that. And my question is a little bit along those lines. On page 175 of the business plan, under initiatives supporting key objectives section, you have 10 million that's allocated to the Treasury and risk management to continue to develop the Heritage Fund Opportunities Corporation with the goal of supporting government's goal to grow the Heritage Fund to bring it to assets of 250 billion or more by 2050. I'm wondering if you can explain to people, because people do ask me this one, is how is this different than than AIMCO, as an example? When I'm referring to the Heritage Fund Opportunities Corporation, how are they different and how will they work with each other? Can you explain a little bit? People don't understand that we have two branches there now.
For sure. No, it's a good question. So when you're picturing AIMCO as an entity, they're an asset manager that has many clients. So picture AIMCO like this, and then you have a lot of different, whether it's the Heritage Fund and HFOC or PSPP or ATRF, all of the different pension organizations are giving their investment priorities and risk profile, that statement of investment policies and goals regarding their investments to AIMCO as an asset manager. HFOC will act much more like the asset owner of the fund. So they're going to create that statement of investment policies and goals. They're going to understand, what not only risk is reasonable for that, but also what their timeline is. Much differently than, say, the executive or the board of one of the pension plans that's, looking at the liquidity they need, looking at the, age of their clients, trying to match that appropriately. AIMCO does manage in a lot of pooled assets as well. There's an economies of scale there that they try to achieve for all of their clients. So HFOC will give that SIP and G or statement of investment policies and goals to AIMCO for the assets under management, but it'll also hold the ability to do some investments as HFOC standalone. We're figuring through the details of that. We don't want to build duplication and redundancy where we don't have to. But there's certain things I don't think we would expect AIMCO to do on their behalf. They have a lot of clients to serve. And so some things HFOC may have to do on their own. We just have to ensure that, costs are managed and that they remember who they're building it for, the people of Alberta.
Thank you so much for that. No, we have a lot of trust in those folks, and I hope they do a fantastic job because, our province depends on that. I'd like to pivot a little bit to talk more about the number of public servants and within the bureaucracy, if you will. On page 178 of the business plan, under performance indicator 3A, it talks that in 2024 there's 5.7, very specific, public servants for every 1,000 Albertans. And that number is lower relative to the combined three provincial averages of Ontario, BC, and Quebec. That's a good thing for me, but we still need to make sure that they deliver the services that we require as Albertans. So to the minister, through the chair, how do you make sure, or what's your plan for ensuring that we have an efficient and capable public service while still ensuring that the size is reasonable, and for that matter, you maintain the same averages and keep it below comparable provinces in regards to the size of our bureaucracy? And if I could just add a second part to that question, if we take a look at British Columbia's budget 2026, their provincial government plans to reduce public sector staffing by about 15,000 full-time positions over the next 3 years due to their deficit. So that NDP government, through the abysmal years that they've had for the last decade plus of driving their economy into the ground, they've hit this financial wall. They have to enter some level of austerity, and that includes reductions across their broader public service. Do you anticipate we'll have to follow that same trajectory, especially with our deficits that we have been running? And would we have to cut some public sector jobs?
Well, I start with this. Very, very proud of the public sector. These services wouldn't exist without the people that work there to provide them. You talked about some of the numbers. I do think you're always trying to search for guardrails and metrics to understand if the public sector's right-sized at any point in time. We're currently, I think this is 2024 number, but 5.7, as you mentioned, public servants per 1,000 residents, just slightly above on Ontario. I don't know if they're 5.4 or 5.6. They were 5.4. Yeah, so we're slightly above them. I've said in the past, and I believe this, I don't think that that's a number you want to chase per se. Like, I think Ontario obviously has a much bigger population. There's economies of scale there that I don't think Alberta should pursue. So it's a good mark, I guess, to be close to them, but not below them. When you speak about what's happening with BC and what's potentially happening with the federal government, I think it's important to understand maybe we're not all as fat as the one you're comparing us to. I think we should understand a lot was done in 2019 in our first year and first term under Premier Kenney when it came to right-sizing the public service. And we're still in many ways, in a catch-up phase of this population growth. But I think it's important to understand that a lot can be done with efficiency, technology, playing at the margins to try to get more productivity out of every person. But if you truly want to make changes like are being discussed in BC and Canada, I think you'll see them attack the function. So if there's something that the people of Alberta think that we shouldn't be doing and that the public sector shouldn't be doing on their behalf, I think if you highlight those things, then I think that those changes make sense. And I think that'll be something that it'll be interesting to see it play out in BC and for the federal government, what functions they're going after. Otherwise, it will be, you know, through attrition and efficiencies, they'll try to do the same thing with less people, and we'll see how effective it is.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for that, Minister. I appreciate those last comments especially. I often wonder about having governments that get back to the basics. I look at our federal government who've crossed over into provincial jurisdiction with things like daycare and other aspects, and it's been frustrating for our government and others to try to adapt to those rules and stuff like that. So certainly hope everyone gets back to their core functions. So thank you again very much for that.
Excellent. Looks like Member Sweet is up. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, you're okay, go back and forth. Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to go down memory lane a little bit with the minister and talk about agriculture. And would like to focus on outcome 2 on page 177 of the Treasury Board and Finance. 2.3, the financial services concierge, together with Invest Alberta, will work with financial services companies and investors to guide them through Alberta's legislative regulatory framework, enabling them to participate in Alberta's financial services sector more easily. This will help diversify the economy and support job creation. So, Minister, the RBC Seeding Scale report shows that Canada's agri-food sector, despite being globally competitive, is slightly undercapitalized, receiving less than 2% of government-backed growth funds and only 4% of total growth capital, leaving a $13 billion investment gap to 2030. This creates a severe growth stage capital cliff where deal activity drops by 450%, slowing commercialization and pushing companies to seek foreign investors. As a result, Canada risks losing value-added processing opportunities, including in Alberta, where firms struggle to secure domestic financing. The report warned that without targeted investment tools and better aligned government programs, Canada will miss major value-added economic potential. So my first question to you, Minister, is can the Minister outline how Alberta's fiscal plan positions the province to capture its share of the $13 billion opportunity, particularly in value-added processing and agri-food manufacturing?
Okay, you had estimates with agriculture though, right?
Last night.
Okay.
Your turn.
I guess I would start at the beginning. You know, we do have to lean on the fact that our advantages are broad. So whether you're talking about agriculture, whether you're talking about you know, tourism or aerospace or defense, we do need to lean on the fact that our tax structure provides broad advantages. We brought in the value-added credit a few years ago in the ag space because we felt that we were missing some investment in a large way due to the investment credits that existed in Saskatchewan, but we didn't want to give the farm away either. No pun intended. We did want to make sure that we understood our advantages completely, looked at, you know, I think the top 13 jurisdictions, northern states, other provinces, and tried to ensure that we were competitive but not a race to the bottom in any way. I like that credit too because it's non-refundable, so you're basically giving future tax forgiveness, ensuring that a company actually not only sets up shop but becomes profitable. I guess to your question about what more can be done, I think we're outpacing all other provinces if I understand it with the credit as it exists, doing better than everyone, and I don't have those fine folks at my disposal now, but I think definitely outpaced the investment curve that we were looking for in agriculture at the time. But if you're looking for more to be done, I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. But I would tell you my initial thoughts are that I think Alberta needs to probably get away from boutique investment credits and lean on their broad-based advantages.
Yeah, and Minister, and I appreciate that. I will say, I mean, we can compare Alberta and Saskatchewan. Yes, we have the tax credit. Yes, we have the corporate tax less than Saskatchewan, but they have stacking. And they have a stacking with a variety of different programs that they offer. So the competitiveness advantage isn't really there. But what I do want to highlight is the fact that the report also noted that agri-food represents less than 2% of government-backed growth funds and only 4% of total growth capital in Canada. So I'm going to bring that, and I will ask you the question attached to that part in a second. But also I wanted to talk about the growth stage investment deal counts fall by 450% between early stage and growth stage companies. That's nationally. And it's a major barrier to scaling value-added agri-food companies. There also tends to be issues around companies going to look for foreign investment opportunities. So I think one of the examples I can give you is Photocana, which is an Alberta-based company, is attempting to build a pulse processing facility in Strathmore, but is struggling to secure domestic capital, and therefore is now going and looking at foreign capital. So I'm going to give you 3 questions because then you can just take the rest of the time. So what direction has Treasury Board and Finance provided to provincial investment entities such as AIMCO and Alberta Enterprise Corporations to ensure that Alberta keeps close these chronic capital shortfalls in agri-food? What specific tools or interventions is the ministry considering to ensure that value-added processing projects stay in Alberta rather than shifting investment and future jobs to foreign jurisdictions? And is the minister considering the creation of a growth stage capital tool, such as first loss guarantees, patent capital, subordinate debt, or revenue-linked instruments to address this gap and support Alberta companies attempting to commercialize value-added innovations in the province?
Well, I guess I would start at the beginning, it's only taken a couple hours and we're done talking about debt and we're bringing her back to, what more can we do? I think when it comes to these entities you mentioned, I think it's important to note, there's no interference in investment decisions with those entities. They have decisions that they have to make. They're looking for risk-adjusted returns at a high level. I think we're fortunate that, leadership in those entities understands that, who they work for, in the sense that, they're out to make things, whether it's AIMCO for their pension clients, whether it's our newly formed Heritage Fund Board, whether it's ATB. They know that they're Albertan. They know they have a job to do, but they have to calculate that risk and deploy that capital. I'm not going to direct them in that way in any way. So if there's a gap in this space, I would think that it's one that will be filled. There's gaps in a lot of places and competition in this space too, and everyone's talking, tech investments. That's the sexy thing right now. AI, data centers. What you're seeing happen in the U.S. So there's that, I guess, competition for capital across the sectors. So ag and value added also has to show that they're worthy of that capital and will create the safe returns that they're looking for, whether we're talking about loans or investment.
And I appreciate that there has to be that risk analysis, especially when you're using the public dollar. I think the struggle with agri-food is obviously it's the large capital intensive infrastructure that is required upfront cost. And being able to project that long-term return is where a lot of the barriers are facing, because they're a long-term projection. Agri-food takes a long time to show the return. The other issue that has come up is that the way the securities are written in Alberta, in partnership with the feds, I recognize they've adopted lots of our things, is that the way the securities currently exist in Alberta puts barriers in place for private equity to be able to gain some of that capital. And so I have spoken to previous ministers of finance about, is there an opportunity to look at the Securities Act to try to find ways where we can support that capital investment in some of those barriers. And I'd be happy to have a chat with you offline about that. But I think there are other tools that you have at your disposal that may not necessarily be about using government dollar, but could help build capital opportunity by just doing some regulatory changes.
Well, I'm happy to have that conversation with you offline, and if the gaps exist and it's something that can be changed, legislatively or regulatory way, or we can talk to the entities involved. But I don't have much more I can give you today.
That's fair. And then just one more thing, I would like to see maybe a little bit more collaboration with AFSC and just that opportunity of using the services that they're providing around attracting and supporting some of that value investment. And just using, you have a ton of tools under your ministry, but then AFSC kind of sits in its own little pocket. And if there's a cross collaboration of being able to engage with some of these investors, the amount of capital investment in downtown Calgary right now that is really interested in engaging in agri-food is a conversation I'm constantly having. I think they're just not sure who to go to and how to make that work. And so it might just be an education thing around who they should be reaching out to.
Okay, well, I'll take that back, and I would say that, you know, that's previous posting, previous file, but,
Excellent. Well, thank you, Minister. We're now going over to Member Petrovic. Thank you very much for your time. Looking forward to the conversation.
not to take your time, member, but just to finish that question quickly,
Time, Minister.
Chair, if you'll allow me, I would just say that that's always been a criticism and a challenge that, you know, the concierge nature is maybe necessary because a lot of these investment attraction entities are siloed and split up, whether it's within agriculture, Invest Alberta, Investment and Growth Fund lives with Jetty. So that's something we're cognizant of and working to make smoother. Sorry, member.
Happy to do so. I'm assuming we're okay to share some time here, Minister?
Yes.
Perfect, thanks. First, I just want to take a moment to just thank, obviously through the chair, thank you and your department for the work that's gone into this budget and the business plan. I know that the documents don't come together overnight. I know that they take a tremendous amount of effort, thoughtful decision-making, hard conversations, but it shows real commitment for you guys trying to get it right for Albertans. So just thank you to you and your team for that first and foremost. I just wanted to kind of take a moment to ground our conversation and what we're talking about when we reference Alberta's tax advantage. And I know you've touched on it a little bit, but I'm hoping we can get you to touch on it a little bit more without some interruptions. As I was reviewing some of the budget, my kid said, wow, these are big numbers. And I realized that these aren't just big numbers on a page, regardless of what my 11-year-old said, but they tried to teach her that they represent something really different for the people that we serve. They reflect the ability for families to keep more of what they earn, small businesses to reinvest into their communities, and our province to remain a place where people see opportunity to choose and build their future. I know this firsthand. My family moved here from the center of the universe. We're from Toronto. You can boo now if you like. But they were seeking the Alberta advantage, and thank goodness they did so. And so for so many Albertans, like my parents, this advantage is felt in every decision that they make. And that's something that Albertans work hard to build and maintain over many years, is this Alberta advantage. It speaks to the broader commitment to affordability, competitiveness, and to ensure that our province continues to stand out as a place where hard work is rewarded. But we know that there's some operating challenges right now. There's an increased pressures on our government, growing demands for service, and the responsibility to manage finances carefully and sustainable. So I want to jump into my question through you, Chair. On page 176 of the business plan, under Performance Indicator 1D, it states that Alberta's tax advantage relative to other provinces stood at $20.1 billion in the 2025-2026 reporting period. Now that tax advantage has been downgraded to $16.9 billion, as we see under fiscal plan page 121. Through you, Chair, to the Minister, can you explain how our tax advantage went from more than $20 billion in 25-26 to $16.9 billion in 26-27?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Chair. Has more to do with what the other provinces did as opposed to what Alberta did. The 16.9 coming down from 20.1, it largely reflects BC's removal of their retail carbon tax, finally. What it doesn't reflect is their increase in taxes that they just announced in this budget. So personal income tax, increase in their sales taxes as well. just personal income tax. Yeah, so that number will change again, so 20.1 down to 16.9, it will come back up. We do have that broad advantage. Want to be clear, that doesn't mean that we're not looking at revenue opportunities. We have to lean on that broad tax advantage, but as you saw in this budget, changes to the tourism levy, rental vehicle tax, we're looking at ways that we can, chip away at this. We're always looking at the expense side, but we've told all ministries to think revenue opportunities as well. Both of those increases, have the advantage in light of not having a sales tax, that they're a way that the government can bring in some revenue from that visitor economy space, and continue to make investments in tourism and that kind of communal infrastructure that we need to serve those people and ensure it can grow. So I think the rationale there is sound, and just want to keep that in context. We're talking about something that's not a drop in the bucket, but very, very small compared to the overall tax advantage that exists and that we want to maintain.
Thank you for that. And you've touched on this just a little bit, but since Alberta maintains the strongest, or I believe it to be the strongest tax advantage in Canada, to the minister, through the chair, what steps will be taken to protect and possibly grow Alberta's tax advantage? I know you talked about the tourism levy and one other. Do you mind expanding just a little bit more on that for me?
Sure. Like I said, I think we'll continue to look at the expense side, obviously, but also for revenue opportunities. We're a growing province with bills to pay. A volatile revenue structure. So it's something that we always have to look at. Affordability is still a major concern, so that's not lost on us. Growing that tax advantage, I would say, maybe difficult from my chair, although it could if the other provinces increase theirs to respond to their challenges. I think we're in a position right now where we largely need to maintain and weather and, build the schools, build the infrastructure, hire the people, and try to catch up to this population growth. And back to a previous question, lean on our broad advantages to continue to attract investment and create jobs.
Thanks. I know we're seeing a lot happening in our neighbors to the west. There's a lot going on in BC. We're seeing that their provincial government increased personal income taxes, property taxes, and I don't know if someone said that, and provincial sales tax in response to their deficit. Maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that as well. Does Alberta have any plans to increase personal income taxes or introduce a provincial sales tax in response to our deficit, or are we going to go a different direction than our neighbors to the west?
Well, I just cut personal income taxes, and like I said earlier, stand by that decision. How do we address the affordability challenge in a way that impacts most Albertans in a sustained way? I think coming back to the strength of our balance sheet, it wasn't long ago BC had the strongest balance sheet in the country. Admittedly, that's hard to say as an Albertan that follows these things a little bit, but that wasn't that long ago. So these trajectories can get away on you in a hurry. That's why I think it's important that the province always has something to keep an eye on and make sure governments of the day aren't letting it get away on them. I think that metric and that thing to look at right now is our net position. It would be unfair and disingenuous to look at anything else, frankly, if you are going to leave the retained earnings in the Heritage Fund and have that commitment to grow it. So I think it's important that the people of Alberta focus on that, to assure that we're going the right way. And then, I've said it in the past. It's sometimes makes me feel a little sad to talk about how great Alberta's doing, because I know it doesn't feel like that for everybody, and it's always in comparison to the rest of the country. The rest of the country has some major challenges. You know, Alberta is doing quite well, especially by comparison, and we need to continue to do that. We need to be a low tax environment. You know, we need to, in our roles, focus on the services that the province needs. But the challenges across this country are immense, and I do believe that's because for decades we didn't focus on our strengths. Any company, every sole proprietor, private business out there that isn't leaning into their strengths won't reach their full potential. Our strengths are many things, but they are largely resources. 40 million people, huge land mass, cold climate, only 7% arable land. We have to lean into that, and I think the fact that there's a global crisis means that now's the time.
Excellent. Thank you so very much for that, Minister. I believe Member Hoyle is up next for the next 10 minutes.
Minister, you're happy to share time? Yeah, thank you. So, as the Shadow Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade, I'd like to discuss the impact of the ongoing U.S. tariffs on Alberta's economy. And we all know that Albertans are concerned about the risks these actions pose to our economy, especially with an unpredictable president and having U.S. as our closest ally and largest trading partner. On page 24 of the fiscal plan, it states that 2026 is proving to be another volatile year for the global economy, and that while trade tensions have eased from last year's heightened levels when the U.S. introduced broad tariffs, U.S. trade policy remains a persistent source of uncertainty. Alberta trades with the U.S. totals $188 billion each year and will affect businesses in both Canada and the U.S. We know that Alberta needs to secure trade agreements and advance policies that open doors to international markets, helping local businesses grow beyond our borders. So through the chair, can the minister share, what is the government's specific plan in this current budget to ease pressures that U.S. tariffs will inevitably place on small and medium-sized business owners in the province? And what is the plan to support local businesses and entrepreneurs in procurement plans?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. We do have, many programs when it comes to, attracting labor and skilled trades programming in Jetty specifically. Broadly, I'm going to come back to this again. We do have to lean on our broad-based advantages. We can't create, new things in response to every challenge. We are a low-tax jurisdiction, continue to cut regulations, speed up permitting and approvals, working with our municipal partners to really let everyone know that we're open for business. We have been fortunate because of our bucket of exports has largely been tariff exempt, and like I said, we don't forecast changes. We don't model off rhetoric. A lot of that is is plausible that it will stay the same because it makes sense from the American perspective as well. They're in a position right now where they're cutting their strategic reserve through that release by almost half. I think it's 179 million barrels. They have about 415 in. We don't see those things changing. Our economic growth, we're predicting about 1.8% GDP growth, so in no way an economic boom, but like I mentioned, still stronger than everywhere else. So I think in a lot of ways, the best way that we can support, the businesses, corporations, job creators in Alberta is by focusing on our core priorities of government, which is, ensuring that they have the schools, the hospitals, the services they need for their workforce, working with our post-secondaries to make sure that they're creating the relevant spaces for Alberta's labor force for the future. And that will be a challenge that we will likely always be chasing. But if you look at like the investment in NATE the skilled trades programming, there, 5,500, 5,600 seats. And just go back to, you know, what the landscape is for corporations in Alberta. Like I've talked about the broad tax, benefits and advantages. We're the least impacted province when it comes to the tariffs. No payroll tax, no healthcare premiums, no sales tax. Not a lot of other levers.
So when we look at page 8 of the strategic plan, it stipulates maintaining Alberta's tax advantage compared to other provinces for both individuals and businesses. Chambers of commerce across the province have previously called for the elimination of the 2% business tax, a step that startups and Indigenous and Black businesses have also asked for. And we know that small businesses make up approximately 95% of the businesses in Alberta and create key jobs. They are key job creators. So through the chair, Minister, can you share any specific dollar amounts of how much the small business tax brings in revenue? And where in this budget is that revenue being reinvested to support small business growth and hiring? And Minister, do you think that this tax should be zero, and if not, why?
Okay, well, to your question of the revenue take, it's about 344 million at 2%. As to your question of, do I believe it should be at zero? No, I don't. I've been pretty clear with the Chambers of Commerce over the last 2 years that it's probably a bad tax shelf from a policy perspective. You know, we held, co-hosted or sponsored the Productivity Summit for Canada, with the U of C last year. And you're looking at, you know, we've talked about cliffs of different sectors and in growth phases. You know, we have a lot of small businesses in Canada, in Alberta too, and that's good. They're the fabric of, you know, our society. But that gap to becoming a larger corporation, employing more people, is evident. You know, it was highlighted at the Productivity Summit. I know nobody wants to pay tax, but we don't want to incentivize businesses to stay small from a policy perspective either. I think the wonks would tell you that it would probably make sense to have the 2% to 8% be closer together to ensure you're incentivizing the right thing. I'm not promoting that or saying that that's something that we're looking at, because we're not. But I would say that we're definitely not looking at going from 2% to 0% either. I've told them flat out that won't be happening.
Is any of this being reinvested? That was one part of my question into supporting, you know, businesses here for hiring.
Invested on every other page, whether it's the school or the hospital or the paying the payroll for the nurses to provide them support. It's everywhere.
Okay. Moving on then to the last question I have here. And so, you know, we know Alberta has a strong oil and gas industry, and I'm someone who actually has owned a business, a very successful business in the oil and gas industry for well over a decade and a half. And I come from a generational family of oil and gas. We do drilling, logging, and perforating. So I very much understand the importance of an oil and gas industry to Alberta. But we must also grow our economy. And Alberta should be looking at opportunities to diversify our economy, not just to increase revenue, but also to increase jobs, attract investment, and help with affordability. So through the chair, can the minister share if this government is working on any market expansion to increase Alberta's job opportunities in the energy industry, and if so, which sectors? And can the minister provide any insight on other key energy industries that the government has identified as potential areas for growth, and which ones are the priority?
Yeah, I would probably leave like the details at the heart of your question to the energy minister, but I would share this with you. Like, you know, since the signing of the MOU and the concessions or exemptions or elimination of, you know, 7 of the 9, as the Premier dubbed it, bad laws, you know, we are seeing, I'd say, an organic, you know, natural excitement in this space. You know, I'd say it's not something that we're having to push per se, but there's just a lot more deals and potential deals being discussed. I think if you look to the news release from South Bow about, the potential for a reimagined Keystone project is very interesting. Those kind of things, wouldn't be possible without the removal of some of those high-level constraints that were in the MOU. So I think looking at, the energy crisis, what's going on in Iran, I think a lot of that is things that we're not going to have to necessarily steer and direct, but will come to us as they should, but should provide a lot of opportunity for egress. The challenges with going west, I'm taking the Prime Minister at his word that he thinks it's in the national interest to get that deal done. I haven't been in those rooms with Premier Eby and the Prime Minister. The Premier has, and I think there's a sincere acknowledgement that this is in the national interest. I've said before, the country's in trouble economically, and nothing can help the country like Alberta's energy. The TMX expansion increased GDP to the country by almost 1%. And you look at our productivity numbers, you look at our job growth numbers. So it's not that I trust everyone, but I think that our interests are aligned in this case for Alberta and the country.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now go over to MLA Rosewall.
Very much, and I appreciate the back and forth. It's a nice way to have a conversation about the budget, so it's great. On page 175 and 76 of the business plan under performance measure 1B, it's showing that a per capita expenditure comparison are made with British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec. And this is, maybe it's been there in the past, but it's the first time I've seen it highlighted as to the per capita expenditures and trying to compare ourselves to other provinces. So to the Minister through the Chair, can you clarify why we use these three provinces as opposed to, say, in West Canada, like Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or the Maritimes? Is there a reason that we do it that way?
I think this goes back to recommendations from the 2019 Blue Ribbon panel. I think Janice McKinnon recommended that Alberta should look to those jurisdictions for these comparisons just because of our size. We should be comparing ourselves to the larger provinces. It might be nice in some ways to always compare ourselves to Saskatchewan, but the fact that we have, 5 million people, more people in, Calgary or Edmonton than their entire province, it's just vastly different. It changes the things that you need to, build and that are required. The scale's different. So I think the recommendation was to use those larger provinces for these comparisons, and so that's what we've done since 2019.
And I guess our scale relative to Ontario and Quebec would be out of whack a little bit, so, but
Yes.
what else are you gonna compare it to, I guess, is the logic behind it. Good. Can the minister compare per capita impact on provincial deficit forecasts in Alberta and in British Columbia, already announced budget in 2026?
Per capita deficit numbers between us and BC?
Yeah, right.
Okay. BC's projecting a deficit of 13.3 billion compared to 9.4. So it'd be about $2,300 per person in BC to about $1,800 in Alberta. Deficit dollars per capita.
Is that something you look at every year, or just?
I think it's it's another one of these metrics and guideposts that I think are important to give you context. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if there's 7 million people here, we still have to answer for the deficit, right? So our revenue doesn't come in per capita.
So then, can you provide any insight into how we're going to outperform those other three provinces regarding per capita expenditures going forward?
Well, I'd say this, so around 2022, we converged with the average of the large provinces, so Ontario, BC, and Quebec, in terms of per capita program spending. And we've kind of maintained this position since then, Alberta coming in slightly below that average. Hard to predict, obviously, the spending trajectories and future decisions of the other provinces. But since 2019, our per capita program spending has increased by about 7.5%, while the spending in the other three provinces you referenced is anywhere from 27% in Ontario to almost 45% in BC. So dramatically different. And I think that points to the importance of the operational expense ceiling in the fiscal rules and having guideposts and anchors and metrics to cling to, especially during rapid population growth. But I guess that's the difference. I would imagine BC's searching desperately for some guideposts and anchors to manage what they do next. But that's why the rules are important.
One question I've always had is, you mentioned this is operational spending per capita, so that's not capital expenditures, like infrastructure, that's in there, right?
That's operational spend.
That is operational, yeah. And it's, people compare us to a business a lot of times, but, I don't buy a $1 million combine and expense it all in 1 year. But that's what we do in government, which is different. So in a catch-up year on capital expenditures, it's, or over a series of a few years, trying to catch up on a per capita basis, it could impact you fairly dramatically. And it could drop after that just because you've caught up on the capital and you go to a more normal level. So is that a different challenge for governments than it would be for, say, a business?
Well, so on the capital side, if it's a capital grant per se, if it's something that, we don't own, but say it's dollars that are going out to a municipality or partner for capital, that hits the fisc at a 1-to-1 in real time. If it's our capital, those things are amortized over time and expensed over time. But the challenge is it still impacts your debt in that year, because the actual cash that's rolling out the door impacts your debt escalation. So it's a little different, but yeah, you do have to look at the actual cash that's going out the door, but it is an investment that you'll amortize over time.
So that does happen at the government level. It gets spread and accounted for, but it's accounted for annually though, isn't it?
The cash out the door is accounted for annually, and it's lumped on the debt.
Okay, very good, that's good. Okay, I'd like to change a little bit here. On page 170 of the business plan, outcome 3 states that Alberta has an efficient and effective public service working for the citizens. And I can tell you it's been one of my learnings since I've got here is how hard the public service works and how valuable they are to us being able to implement what we're talking about. So to the minister through the chair, since an organization can only be as effective as the people that support and operate it, and given the critical role that skilled, professional, well-qualified workforce plays in delivering high-quality public services, what specific steps will you take to ensure that the hiring practices across the public service continue to prioritize merit, relevant qualifications, and demonstrated competence and overall excellence in recruitment?
No, thank you, Member Rosewell. The Government of Alberta remains firmly committed to fair, transparent, and merit-based hiring in the Alberta Public Service. The Public Service Act, which governs all hiring in the public service, states each appointment to and promotion within the public service shall be predicted on the selection of the most suitable applicant. Appointments are made by selecting the most suitable applicant through an objective, evidence-based assessment of qualifications, experience, and demonstrated competencies. Recruitment processes are designed to be impartial, defensible, and able to withstand public scrutiny while reinforcing a high-performing, merit-based culture. The Public Service Commission continues to publicly post competitions, prioritize frontline service delivery, and regularly review hiring practices to ensure they uphold the values of respect, accountability, integrity, and excellence while attracting the talent needed to serve Albertans. So it's at the forefront of, you know, everything they do and how they bring people into the public service. I do have Ms. Caltagirone here if you wanted her to go in depth on anything, but to the start of your question and the thanks you gave the public service, it's not just because I'm surrounded by them right now, but I would say I've definitely, you know, maybe my naivety before having this job, but definitely gained a profound appreciation for the work that they do, especially in supporting, you know, these roles with, you know, Albertan lay people like myself that, you know, hold these chairs for a time, and they have to be prepared to support and give the best advice that they can in real time, and they always do a wonderful job. So, very appreciative.
And, you know, since I've come in, I've learned there's a lot of really interesting jobs in government. If I knew back then when my kids were younger that I know now, it's a real career path, because you can start in one ministry and you work your way to another one and become quite broad in your experiences. So I think it's a great place to work. Thanks.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, member. We are going, Member Brar. Excellent. Thank you. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, are you good with sharing time? Minister, I appreciate your time today, and I would like to raise a number of concerns that my constituents in Edmonton, Ellerslie have brought forward regarding the impact of current budget on affordability for both families and small businesses. My goal is to better understand the rationale behind the certain budget measures and how they are expected to address the cost of living, the pressure Albertans face. First, property tax related to education funding appeared to increasing. According to the fiscal plan, page 123, 124, the residential and farmland education property tax will rise to $2.84 per thousand. This translates to approximately over $300 in additional taxes on maiden value homes. Through the chair to minister, could you explain the key factors driving this increase? Specifically, what analysis was undertaken to determine that this rise in education property tax is necessary at a time when many families are already struggling with rising rent, groceries, and utility bills?
No, thank you for the question. So, in budget 2025, a year ago here, some of us were in these same chairs, but I clearly laid out the plan to get back to 33% of educational operating expense. That's where the province has historically been at. The correlation is directly related to the $10.8 billion in operating expense that you see in education's estimates here. Obviously, the money has to come from somewhere. You know, that's a base that we've historically used. I'm sure that at one moment in time, a government of the day gave that up. Maybe they were in a sustained surplus position and felt that they didn't need it. But we certainly need it now. So I guess it brings that conversation of is there things we spent in the education budget that we shouldn't have? You know, that property tax increase doesn't reflect in any way the domination of the capital plan by school construction. That is simply correlated to operating expense. So I think the real need of education is what drove this. Back to some of your earlier points in the question, Albertans definitely are still in many households having major affordability challenges. That's why I've referenced the fact that, you know, we have very few levers to pull to impact that directly. That's why the personal income tax cut was so important. That's why we're trying to do the right thing to avoid things like sales taxes and healthcare premiums, all those other advantages that we have. But when you really look at this budget, like I hear the comments like, what's in it for me? Having a functioning healthcare system, having an education system that, you know, that works, that's addressing complexity. You know, if you look at the spend of government, it's truly health, education, you know, and a myriad of other things. But when you look at how government spending impacts Albertans, you know, if you're a healthy, well-adjusted person or family that's able to put enough on the table for your family, you don't get much from government ever. You pay your taxes and you have health care and education. You know, most of our programming is focused on those in the most need, which is, you know, obviously lower income, also, you know, disabled folks.
Sorry, I just want to add a couple more questions here. Also, the small businesses, I know you went on your way, but there is a couple of questions need to address. For small business, they are equally concerned as of page 124 on fiscal plan, indicate that non-residential property tax rates will shift to $4.17 per thousand. For small shops like in Edmonton or Calgary, this could addition to thousands of new annual cost for already struggling businesses. Through the chair to Minister, could you discuss the economic modeling behind the change? How does the government plan to support small and medium enterprises in remaining viable under higher tax burdens, particularly when the goal is to encourage local investment and job retentions?
Well, like these increases are real. You've laid them out on residential, farmland, 2.72 to 2.85 per $1,000 of assessment. On commercial, $4 to $4.17. Once again, directly related to the education spend. Companies, job creators expect to have these services for their employees, for themselves, and this is the priority of government, and I would say of most governments. And healthcare, education, post-secondary education dominates this. So for those concerned businesses, I would say I definitely hear you, and we're trying to maintain the broad advantages that we have. Like I said, no payroll tax, no healthcare premiums, no sales tax, the lowest taxes in the country by far, and do what we can with the revenue that we have, while also taking criticism for running a deficit and all of the other things. So we need to also appreciate what we have.
Also about affordability is also being challenged by rising auto insurance rates. Some drivers tell me that their premium jumped sharply in this January. A report from the Insurer Rate Board shows grid rate, base rate 20% up effectively January 1st in 2026. I'm hearing from my constituents that the increase are forcing difficult choice, such as reducing grocery, withdrawing children from extracurricular activities, just to keep vehicle insured. So through the chair to minister, what led to the decision to raise the cap or provide target relief for mandatory auto insurance during this period of cost escalation before 2027 for sure?
Well, I've said we kind of have our finger in the dam, so to speak, here, while we try to get to January 1, 2027. You know, there's the good driver rate cap, there's also, rate caps within ARB over an entire, book of business. But the system is unsustainable in this way. If we weren't going to move to Care First, you know, we would have to lift the good driver rate cap, let the system stabilize, and you could expect that premiums would skyrocket. So it's important that we land this, get to the stable pricing that Care First will provide, and get away from any market distortion that, you know, short-term rate caps are causing, because it does depend on which side of that you are. It's great that the good driver rate cap is, you know, protecting, you know, maybe the majority of Albertans, but if you find yourself outside that, it certainly isn't helpful. So we need to get back to just having the best ratings possible for all Albertans, which I look forward to in January.
Also, on page 122 indicate that 6% vehicle rental tax. So through the chair to Minister, could you explain the policy rationale for layering these fees on top of rising insurance and personal transportation cost? Because many families, businesses rely on the rental industry. So what analysis or was there to raise the 6% vehicle rental?
Yeah, part of our process, you know, continually looking at expense, but also revenue opportunities. This came up in the summer, and we did look at, you know, policy specifics of what should be applicable, you know, what the rate should be. Obviously, $9 billion deficit, we are looking for revenue opportunities. Has the advantage that, you know, 55%.
Excellent. Thank you both for your questions. We're going to go back to the government side. Member Sear.
Well, with my whole 48 seconds, I appreciate all the good work that you and your staff have done so far. It's halfway through, and I look forward to continuing my block in the afternoon after question period. And I'll be focusing mainly on the deficit that we've got before us, this looming deficit, as you were just speaking about, kind of giving us some, or asking some questions about clarity and maybe getting some direction from your department. But sir, thank you for this morning. I know that your answers or your responses were very clear, and it appears that your staff have very diligently given you the tools you need to be successful for this morning meeting. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, committee members. Oh, there's no buzzer. Okay, perfect. I do not hesitate to interrupt, but I must advise the committee time allotted for this portion of consideration of the ministry's estimates has concluded. I would like to remind committee members that we are scheduled to meet this afternoon, March 17th at 3:30 to continue consideration of the estimates of the Ministry of Treasury, Board and Finance. Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned until this afternoon.